I didn't realize my grandfather's legacy was gone until I saw the blood-red Tesla crushing his hand-planted white roses. The engine's silence was chilling, a stark contrast to my brother's loud boasting about his new beast. But the study held a worse silence. The display case housing the General's silver-plated Colt 1911s was empty, leaving only pale dust rectangles. They had traded our family's soul for a toy that loses 20% of its value the moment it drives away. My name is Naomi Thorne. For the last 6 months, I had been living out of a tactical duffel bag in a humid, mosquito-infested safe house just outside of Caracas, negotiating the release of 3 aid workers from a paramilitary group that viewed human life as a currency subject to inflation. My job at Blackridge Solutions required me to be a vessel of absolute calm, a mirror that reflected nothing but patience and logic in the face of erratic violence. I was good at it. I was perhaps too good at it. But as the town car wound its way through the manicured, tree-lined streets of Greenwich, Connecticut, I felt that professional detachment beginning to fracture. I was 32 years old, yet the moment the wrought iron gates of my childhood home came into view, I felt a familiar, suffocating tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with high-stakes diplomacy and everything to do with the people waiting behind those double oak doors. I had been craving the specific silence of this house, not the silence of an empty hotel room, but the heavy, dust-moat silence of the library, the smell of my grandfather's old leather armchair, and the reassuring permanence of the history he had built. General Elias Thorne had been the only real thing in a world of counterfeits. He was the reason I chose a life of service over a life of leisure. I needed to see his things. I needed to touch the wood of his desk to ground myself before I faced my parents. But the house that loomed ahead was not the sanctuary I remembered. The first violation was the driveway, or rather, what was parked halfway onto the lawn next to it, a Tesla Model S Plaid, painted a shade of red so aggressive it looked like an open wound, was parked haphazardly, its front left tire crushing the bed of white roses my grandfather had planted with his own hands 40 years ago. I stared at the crushed petals, mashed into the mud by the heavy tread of the electric vehicle. Those roses were a hybrid species he had cultivated himself, a symbol of peace after a lifetime of war. Now they were roadkill, and there was Leo. My 22-year-old brother was standing on the hood of the car. He had a ring light set up on a tripod in the driveway, and he was gyrating to some erratic beat that I could not hear through the glass of the town car. He wore designer streetwear that cost more than the annual salary of the men I had just spent months negotiating with, and his face was contorted into that fake, open-mouthed expression of exaggerated excitement that played well on TikTok. He was filming a reveal video. He was dancing on the grave of a rose garden to celebrate a battery-operated status symbol. I paid the driver and stepped out. The air in Connecticut was crisp, but it tasted metallic to me. Leo did not notice me. He was too busy shouting into his phone camera, pointing at the car's sleek lines, performing wealth for an audience of strangers who would forget him in 15 seconds. I walked past him, dragging my single suitcase. The silence of the car's engine was eerie. It felt like a predator lying in wait, whereas the vintage muscle cars my grandfather loved had purred with a mechanical honesty. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, expecting the comforting, musty scent of old paper and floor wax. Instead, I was assaulted by an aggressive wave of white florals. It smelled like a department store perfume counter, sharp and chemical. My eyes adjusted to the dim light, and my stomach turned. The foyer had been gutted. The heavy, dark wainscoting that gave the house its gravity was gone, replaced by flat, grey-gray panels that looked like they belonged in a sterile dental clinic. The antique grandfather clock, which had ticked away every second of my childhood with a rhythmic, heartbeat-like thud, was missing. In its place hung an abstract piece of metal art that looked like a car crash frozen in chrome. It was modern. It was expensive. It was utterly soulless. I left my suitcase by the door and walked straight to the study. I did not call out for my parents. I did not look for Leo. I walked with the singular focus of a person checking a perimeter after a breach. The double doors to the study were open. I stepped over the threshold and stopped dead. My grandfather's study had been a museum of a life well lived. It was where he kept the physical manifestations of his honor. The centerpiece of the room had always been the custom-built mahogany display cabinet behind his desk. Inside that cabinet, resting on velvet that was the color of dried blood, lay the two things he valued most, not for their monetary worth, but for what they represented. There was the pair of Colt 1911 pistols, their handles inlaid with ivory, a personal gift from the president after the campaign in the Pacific. They were works of art, lethal and beautiful, engraved with his initials. Below them, on a separate stand, was his ceremonial dress sword, the steel Damascus folded, the hilt wrapped in gold wire, and tucked into the corner of the shelf was his field diary, a battered leather book held together by twine, containing the only honest words he had ever written about the things he had seen and done to keep this country safe. I looked at the cabinet. The glass doors were closed, but the shelves were bare. It was not just that the items were missing, it was the violence of their removal. The velvet was undisturbed, but there were pale, rectangular shapes in the dust where the display stands had sat for decades. The dust outlined the ghosts of the objects. It was a fresh theft. The void where the pistols should have been hit me with the force of a physical blow to the solar plexus. I felt the air leave my lungs. I walked around the desk, my fingers trailing over the empty space. The diary was gone too. The history of our family, the blood and the ink, had been scrubbed clean. I heard the clinking of glass from the living room. I turned and walked out of the study, my boots heavy on the new, pale hardwood floors that had replaced the original oak parquetry. In the living room, which had been redecorated in shades of cream and beige, so impractical they screamed of people who never did their own cleaning, sat Sylvia and Robert Thorne, my parents. They were lounging on a low-slung Italian sofa. A bottle of very expensive, very dry white wine chilling in a silver bucket between them. My mother, Sylvia, was holding a crystal flute up to the light, inspecting the bubbles with the critical eye she usually reserved for my career choices. She looked impeccable. Her face pulled tight by a recent visit to her surgeon, her skin glowing with the sheen of a woman who has never known a day of manual labor. My father, Robert, was scrolling through his iPad, looking distinguished in a cashmere sweater that cost $2,000. "We should do the Amalfi Coast first," Sylvia was saying, her voice a melodic drone. "If we wait until August, the tourists will be unbearable. I simply cannot deal with the crowds this year." "Robert, we need a private villa." "Agreed," Robert murmured, not looking up. "I'll have the assistant book the yacht for the second week. We deserve a break after all this stress." I stood in the archway for a full 10 seconds before they noticed me. I was wearing my travel clothes cargo pants, a black tactical shirt, and heavy boots. I looked like I had just come from a war zone, which I had. They looked like they were posing for a catalog. "Naomi," my mother said, her tone suggesting she had just noticed a stain on the carpet. She did not stand up. She did not ask if I was hurt. She did not ask how the negotiation went. "You're back early. I thought you were in, where was it, Colombia?" "Venezuela," I said. My voice was raspy. I cleared my throat, forcing the negotiator's mask back into place. "I have been gone 6 months, Mother." "Well, you are here now," she said, taking a sip of wine. "You look tired, and that outfit is dreadful. You really must stop dressing like a mercenary. It upsets the neighbors." "Where are they?" I asked. Robert looked up from his iPad, blinking as if he had forgotten who I was. "Where are you, darling?" "The pistols," I said, stepping into the room. Grandfather's Colt 1911s, the ceremonial sword, the diary, the display case is empty. Sylvia sighed. A long, suffering sound that vibrated in her throat. She set her glass down on the marble coaster with a sharp click. "Oh, please, Naomi, do not start with the melodrama the moment you walk through the door. We are having a nice evening." "I am not starting anything," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming colder. "I am asking a question. Where are the general's effects? They were in the study when I left. We decluttered, Robert said, waving his hand vaguely in the air. The house was feeling so heavy, so stuck in the past. We wanted to open up the energy. You know how your mother is about feng shui these days. Feng shui, I repeated, the absurdity of the words tasting like ash in my mouth. You removed historical artifacts for feng shui. They were weapons. Naomi, Sylvia said, shuddering theatrically. Guns, huge, ugly guns with ivory handles. It is barbaric to keep things like that in a civilized home. They carry such negative energy, violence, death. I could not sleep knowing they were downstairs. It felt like sleeping in an armory. Those guns were a gift from the President of the United States, I said, measuring every syllable. They were not negative energy. They were history. Where are they stored? Did you put them in the safe deposit box? Before they could answer, the front door slammed open. A gust of wind blew into the hallway, followed by the stomping of designer sneakers. Leo burst into the living room. His face flushed with adrenaline and narcissism. He was twirling a Tesla key fob around his finger like a gunslinger. Yo, Mom, Dad, he shouted, completely ignoring my presence. The lighting is perfect right now. I need the spare fob. I want to do a bit where I throw the keys at the camera and the car starts automatically. But I don't want to scratch the primary fob. Do we have the spare? He stopped when he saw me, his eyes widening slightly, then narrowing into a smirk. Oh, hey, sis. You're back. Didn't know you were coming. You look like you need a shower. Hello, Leo, I said. Nice car. You're parked on the roses. The roses. He laughed, a short, barking sound. Those old bushes, they were dead anyway. Besides, did you see the Beast Model S Plaid? 0 to 60 in under 2 seconds. It is literally the fastest production car in the world. He turned back to Robert. Dad, seriously, where is the spare? I have 50,000 people on the live stream right now waiting for the interior tour. In the kitchen drawer, son, Robert said, beaming at him with a pride that made my stomach churn. Be careful with the upholstery. That is vegan leather. Leo, I said, stepping between him and the kitchen. How did you afford a $130,000 car? You have been unemployed since you graduated 3 months ago. Leo rolled his eyes, throwing his head back. Here we go. The interrogation. I'm an entrepreneur. Naomi, I'm building a brand. You wouldn't understand. You work for a salary. I create equity. He needed the car for his image, Robert interjected, standing up and smoothing his sweater. You cannot expect a young man to make connections in the business world driving a used Honda. Appearance is reality. Naomi, we wanted to give him a head start, a reward. A reward for what? I asked. For taking 6 years to finish a 4-year degree in communications, for getting kicked out of his internship after 2 weeks. For persevering, Sylvia snapped. Stop being so jealous. Naomi, it is unbecoming. I looked from Leo, who was checking his reflection in the hallway mirror, to my parents, who were looking at me with a mixture of annoyance and pity. And then the pieces clicked together, the timeline, the decluttering, the sudden influx of cash required to buy a 6-figure car in cash because Robert's credit had been spotty for years. A fact I knew because I had bailed him out twice. The silence in the room stretched thin. You sold them, I said. It wasn't a question. Robert coughed and looked at his wine glass. Sylvia stiffened, lifting her chin in defiance. We found a very interested buyer, Robert said, his voice taking on the slippery cadence of a bad salesman. A private collector, very discreet. He paid cash. It was a fantastic deal. Naomi, you should be proud of your father's negotiating skills. We got $120,000 for the lot. Can you believe it? For some rusty metal and old books? This morning, Sylvia added, as if that made it better. The transaction cleared this morning. It was perfect timing. The dealer came, took those horrid boxes away, and we went straight to the dealership. Leo is so happy. Look at him. My vision tunneled. $120,000. They had sold the physical embodiment of my grandfather's sacrifice, the steel that had protected him, the ivory that had been granted to him by a nation, the diary that held his soul for exactly enough money to buy a depreciating asset for a boy who had never worked a hard day in his life. Who? I asked. My voice was so quiet, it was almost a whisper. Who did you sell them to? I don't remember the name, Robert said, waving his hand again. Some LLC, antique something or other. I signed the bill of sale and he handed over the briefcase. It was very cinematic, actually. You sold General Thorne's legacy, I said. For a car? It is our house. Naomi, Sylvia said, her voice sharp. Everything in it belongs to us. We can do what we want. And honestly, we did it for the family. Leo needed this boost. You have your dangerous little job. You are fine. Leo needs help. Leo grabbed the spare key from the kitchen drawer and pushed past me, bumping my shoulder. Don't be a hater, Naomi. I'll let you sit in the passenger seat if you ask nicely. Just don't touch anything with those dirty hands. He slammed the front door behind him. I stood there, looking at my parents. They returned to their wine, the conversation about Lake Como resuming as if I had simply evaporated. They had not just sold the items, they had sold the memory. They had cashed in the dignity of a man they were never worthy of, just to keep up appearances for another few months. I looked at the empty space on the wall where the grandfather clock used to be. I felt the training take over. The anger did not disappear. It just changed state. It went from a hot, chaotic fire to a cold, hard block of ice. I knew, with absolute certainty, that screaming would do nothing. Crying would do less. These people did not speak the language of emotion or honor. They spoke the language of leverage and loss, and I had just realized that the negotiation was not over. It had not even begun. I see, I said. I turned around and walked out of the living room. Naomi, Sylvia called out, a hint of irritation in her voice. Where are you going? Dinner is in an hour. The cook made salmon. I'm not hungry, I said, not breaking my stride. I walked out the front door, past the Tesla where Leo was now filming a video of himself sitting on the hood, flashing a peace sign. I walked past the crushed white roses. I walked down the driveway, the gravel crunching under my combat boots. I did not stop until I was outside the iron gates. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my satellite phone, the one I used for secure communications in hostile territories. I dialed a number I had not called in years. It was not the police. The police could not fix this. This was a family matter, and it required a family solution. I waited for the line to connect, listening to the hollow ringing sound, staring back at the house that was no longer a home. It was just a building filled with thieves. The line clicked open. Grandmother, I said, we have a problem. I did not keep walking. I could not. The training that had kept me alive in the jungles of Venezuela, the discipline that taught me to assess threats and neutralize them with cold logic, momentarily failed me. My boots stopped crunching on the gravel. The image of the empty display case burned behind my eyelids, a negative photograph of betrayal. I turned around. I marched back up the driveway, past the electric red monstrosity that was currently serving as a stage for my brother's ego, and kicked the front door open with enough force to rattle the abstract chrome art hanging in the foyer. I needed them to say it. I needed to hear the justification in full, without the gloss of wine and casual dismissal. I walked back into the living room. Sylvia and Robert looked up, genuine annoyance crossing their faces. I had interrupted their toast. I thought you left, my mother said, swirling her Chardonnay. We were just discussing whether the master suite needs a balcony. It is not your property to sell, I said. My voice was low, a rumble that vibrated in my own chest. I stood in the center of the room, a dark blot on their pristine cream rug. Grandfather's will was specific. The contents of the study were to remain undisturbed until I turned 30. I am 32. I have been out of the country. That does not mean you absorb my inheritance by osmosis. Robert laughed. It was a wet, dismissive sound. He set his glass down and laced his fingers together. adopting the pose of a patriarch he had never earned the right to be. "Naomi, darling, you really need to brush up on your property law," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "The will stated the house and its contents went to me. You were mentioned, yes, regarding the care of certain items. But possession is 9/10 of the law, and since I pay the property taxes, everything under this roof belongs to me, to us. We are the heads of this household, not the ghost of a man who died 10 years ago." "Those were not just items," I countered, fighting the urge to cross the distance between us and shatter the wine bottle against the fireplace. "That sword was carried at his inauguration as a general. The pistols were a symbol of national gratitude. They belong to history, not to a pawn shop." "Oh, stop being so dramatic," Sylvia interjected, waving a hand as if swatting away a fly. "You always were so morbid, even as a child. Honestly, Naomi, look at this room. Look at the lines. Look at the flow. We have finally achieved a modern, minimalist aesthetic. Do you have any idea how much negative energy those weapons were radiating? It is bad feng shui to keep instruments of death in a residential space. I could feel the heaviness every time I walked past that dusty old study. It was suffocating. We are cleansing the house. We are bringing in light." "You cleansed history for a Tesla," I spat. "For the future," Robert corrected, his face reddening slightly. "Leo is the future of this family. You chose your path. Naomi, you chose to be what is it you call yourself? A security consultant, a glorified bodyguard. You live in tents and chase criminals. Leo has vision. He is building a personal brand. In the digital economy, image is currency. That car is not a toy. It is a mobile studio. It is a statement. And frankly, $120,000 was a steal for that junk. The dealer said the market for World War II memorabilia is crashing. We were lucky to get rid of it before it became worthless scrap metal." I looked at Leo, who had wandered back inside, bored with his solo filming. He was leaning against the door frame, scrolling through comments on his phone, the blue light illuminating his smirk. "Don't be salty just because Dad didn't buy you a ride," Leo said, not looking up. "I mean, what would you even do with a plaid? You'd probably paint it camouflage and drive it into a ditch. Face it, Naomi. I'm the one who's actually going to be famous. You're just invisible. You're a ghost. I'm an influencer. The ROI on me is just higher." "ROI?" I repeated. "Return on investment. You failed." Introduction to economics twice. Leo. "Haters gonna hate," he muttered, finally looking at me. "You are just jealous that I'm the favorite. You have always been the favorite of the old man. And look where that got you. Dirty fingernails and a bad attitude. Dad made a business decision. A smart one." I turned back to Robert. "Grandfather made you promise. I stood right there, by his deathbed. When you swore to him that you would preserve the collection, you looked him in the eye. Robert, you held his hand." Robert's eyes flickered, but he didn't flinch. "Words are wind, Naomi. That is what the real world is like. If it is not notarized, if it is not on a contract filed with the county clerk, it does not exist. Sentimental promises do not pay for country club memberships. They do not pay for trips to Europe, and they certainly do not buy relevance. Your grandfather was a hoarder. We did him a favor by liquidating his obsession." I felt a coldness spread through my veins that was sharper than the anger. It was the clarity of absolute severance. They were not just greedy. They were devoid of the capacity to understand value beyond a price tag. But there was one thing missing, one detail that gnawed at me. "The diary," I said. "The leather journal. It was in the case. The dealer took that too." Sylvia made a face, wrinkling her nose as if she had smelled sour milk. She reached for a grape from the fruit bowl, popping it into her mouth before answering. "That filthy old thing?" she asked, chewing slowly. "God, no. The dealer did not want it. He said he was interested in the hard assets, metal, ivory, gold. He had no use for a rotting book full of scribbles." "So where is it?" I took a step forward. "Where is the diary?" "Mother." I threw it out, she said. The air left the room. The silence that followed was so absolute, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen down the hall. You what? I threw it in the recycling bin last Tuesday, Sylvia said, her tone utterly casual. It was falling apart, Naomi. The binding was rotted. It was shedding little pieces of brown leather everywhere. It was making the display case dirty. I tried to move it and a pile of loose papers fell out. Old letters, receipts, nonsense. It smelled of mildew. I could not have that smell in my new library, so I tossed it. The recycling truck came on Wednesday. My hands curled into fists at my sides. My fingernails dug into my palms until I felt the skin break. That diary contained the coordinates of the men he had lost. It contained the letters he had written to my grandmother from the trenches in Bastogne. It contained the moral compass of the Thorne bloodline, and she had thrown it away because it dusted her velvet. There were letters in there, I whispered. Letters to you, letters to me. They were illegible, she snapped, defensive now. And dirty. Don't look at me like that. Naomi, you look like a psychopath. It was trash. We did not sell it because it was worth $0. We disposed of it. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me. I looked at the man who had sired me. I looked at the boy who shared my DNA. And I saw nothing. I saw strangers. I saw parasites in designer clothing. My training kicked in hard. Assess the threat. The threat is emotional compromise. The target is unrecoverable. Abort mission. Evacuate. Violence would solve nothing. If I touched them, if I did what every fiber of my being was screaming to do, I would be the one in handcuffs, and they would play the victims on the evening news. Leo would probably live stream my arrest. I had to be smarter. I had to be the general's granddaughter, not their daughter. I see, I said again. This time, the words were final. Good, Robert said, checking his watch. Now that we have cleared the air, are you staying for dinner? We can have the cook set another place. Though you might want to wash up first. No, I said. I am not staying for dinner. I am not staying for anything. Suit yourself, Sylvia said. Turning back to her husband. Robert, about the villa rental. Make sure it has a heated pool. I turned on my heel. I did not look back. I walked out of the living room, down the hallway that smelled of chemical flowers, and out the front door. I walked past my suitcase. I left it there. I didn't want the clothes. I didn't want anything that had absorbed the air of this house for even 20 minutes. I walked out into the night. The air was colder now. The Tesla was dark, Leo finally having retreated inside to edit his masterpiece. I walked down the long driveway, my shadow stretching out under the street lamps. I did not stop at the gate. I kept walking until I was 3 blocks away, standing under the canopy of an old oak tree that obscured me from the view of the neighborhood patrol. I reached into my tactical vest and pulled out the satellite phone again. My hand was shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of suppressed rage. I dialed the number. It rang 3 times. Speak, a voice said. It was not a greeting. It was a command. The voice was raspy, aged, but unbreakable. It sounded like grinding stones. Grandmother, I said, it is Naomi. You are back. Evelyn Thorne said, you went to the house. I did. And it is gone. I said, all of it. The Colts, the sword. They sold them this morning. $120,000. Cash. There was a silence on the other end, but it was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a judge reviewing evidence. And the diary, she asked. Sylvia threw it in the recycling. I said, my voice cracked. She said it was dirty. I heard a sound, then a sharp intake of breath, followed by the slow, deliberate clicking of a lighter. My grandmother had quit smoking 30 years ago, but she still kept a Zippo on her desk to play with when she was thinking. Click, shut, click, shut. They have finally done it, she said softly. My son has finally found the courage to completely destroy himself. I am coming to D.C. I said, I am walking to the train station now. I have nothing with me. I left my bag. Good, she said. You do not need baggage where we are going. Listen to me. Naomi, do not cry. Do not scream. Do not let them see you bleed. Robert and Sylvia think they have made a transaction. They think this is about money. They do not understand that they have just declared war. I want to burn it down, I confessed. I want to burn the house down with that car in the driveway. No, Evelyn said. Fire is too quick. Fire is merciful. We are not arsonists. Naomi, we are thorns. We are going to dismantle them, brick by brick. We are going to strip the veneer off their lives until they are naked in the winter wind. Get on the train. Come to the estate. I will have the security team meet you at Union Station. Grandmother, I asked, did you know? I knew your father was desperate, she said. I knew he was weak, but I did not think he was stupid enough to sell federal property. Get here, Naomi. We have work to do. And Naomi, yes. When you arrive, you will not be a granddaughter visiting her family. You will be a soldier reporting for duty. Is that understood? Understood, I said. Good. Out. The line went dead. I lowered the phone. I looked back one last time in the direction of the house I had grown up in. I felt nothing for it anymore. The cord was cut. I turned my collar up against the wind and began the long walk to the station. The hunt had begun. The train ride from Connecticut to Washington, D.C., passed in a blur of motion and reflected lights against black windows. I did not sleep. I stared at my own reflection in the glass, watching the landscape of the northeast corridor dissolve into the darkness, my mind replaying the image of the empty display case on a loop. By the time I arrived at Union Station, the adrenaline had faded, replaced by a cold, exhaustion-fueled clarity. A black SUV was waiting for me at the curb, the engine idling. The driver was not a chatty Uber contractor, but a man named Graves, who had been my grandmother's head of security for 20 years. He did not ask for my luggage. Seeing that I had none, he simply opened the back door, nodded once, and drove. We headed out towards Potomac, leaving the city noise behind for the quiet. Imposing wealth of the old estates, my grandmother, Evelyn Thorne, did not live in a house. She lived in a fortress disguised as a Georgian manor. The estate was surrounded by a 12-foot stone wall topped with sensors that were far more sophisticated than they looked. As we approached the iron gates, they swung open silently, admitting us into a world that felt entirely separate from the modern, plastic reality my parents inhabited. The manor loomed ahead, a massive structure of gray stone and slate, lit only by the amber glow of the security perimeter and a single light burning in the east wing. This was where the real power of the Thorne family resided. Not in the flashy, debt-ridden lifestyle of my parents, but here, in the quiet accumulation of influence and secrets. Graves stopped the car at the portico. "She is in the library, Ms. Thorne," he said. "She has been expecting you since the call." I walked through the heavy double doors, the familiar scent of beeswax, old paper, and unlit pipe tobacco greeting me. It was the smell of my childhood, the smell of the general. The house was silent, but it was a heavy, pregnant silence, unlike the vacuous emptiness of my parents' home. This silence had weight. I made my way to the library. The door was ajar. Evelyn Thorne sat in the center of the room, positioned in front of the fireplace where a low fire crackled, casting long, dancing shadows against the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. She was 80 years old, confined to a wheelchair for the last 5 years after a stroke had taken the use of her legs, but left her mind sharper than a diamond cutter. She was dressed in a dark velvet robe, her silver hair pulled back into a severe, immaculate bun. She was playing chess against herself. I stood in the doorway, watching her thin, vein-mapped hand hover over the board. She picked up a black knight, considered the board for a long moment, and then placed it down with a decisive click. "You look terrible, Naomi," she said, without turning her head. Her voice was dry, lacking the trembling frailty one might expect from an octogenarian. It was the voice of a woman who had spent 40 years on the federal bench, sending men to prison for the rest of their natural lives without blinking. "They sold it, grandmother," I said. Walking into the room, I felt like a child again, coming to report a broken vase, except the vase was our honor. "They sold everything." Evelyn finally turned her wheelchair to face me. Her eyes were the same steel gray as mine, but where mine were burning with fresh anger. Hers were cold, ancient, and unreadable. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to the leather wingback chair opposite her. I sat. The leather creaked under me. "I should have called the police immediately," I said, my hands gripping the armrests. "I should have reported the theft. The jurisdiction is messy because it is family property, but with your connections—" "Quiet," Evelyn said. It wasn't a shout. It was a flat suppression of sound. "You are reacting, Naomi. You are a negotiator. You know better than to react. You respond." She reached for a crystal decanter on the side table and poured a small amount of amber liquid into 2 glasses. She pushed one toward me. "Drink. It is brandy. It will steady your hands." I took the glass. My hands were shaking. I drank. The heat hit my stomach, grounding me. "Tell me exactly what happened," she said. Omitting nothing, I want the words they used. I recounted the evening, the Tesla on the roses, the empty cabinet, the feng shui argument, $120,000, the recycling bin. When I got to the part about Sylvia throwing away the diary because it was dirty, Evelyn's expression did not change, but her hand tightened on the arm of her wheelchair until her knuckles turned white. She closed her eyes for a brief second, inhaled deeply through her nose, and exhaled. "It is done, then," she said softly. "The final betrayal. I suppose I should be impressed by their consistency. They are relentlessly disappointing. We have to get the items back," I said, leaning forward. "The buyer was a private dealer. Robert didn't know the name, but we can trace the transaction, if we move fast." "We will get them back," Evelyn interrupted. "But that is the easy part. Recovering the objects is a matter of logistics. Punishing the thieves is a matter of strategy." She wheeled herself over to a massive oak desk that had once belonged to her father, a senator. She unlocked the bottom drawer with a key she kept on a chain around her neck and pulled out a thick, heavy file folder. It was not a digital tablet or a sleek binder. It was old-school manila, bound with red tape. She slid it across the desk toward me. "Open it." I opened the file. The first page was a legal document. Stamped with the seal of a law firm I recognized as one of the most powerful in D.C. The date on the document was 10 years ago, 2 weeks before my grandfather died. "What is this?" I asked, scanning the legal jargon. "Your grandfather was a patriot, Naomi, but he was not a fool," Evelyn said, her eyes gleaming in the firelight. "He loved your father, but he did not like him. He knew Robert was weak. He knew Sylvia was vain, and he knew that the moment he was in the ground, they would view his legacy as nothing more than an asset to be liquidated." She pointed a long, bony finger at the document. "Read the clause regarding the chattels of historical significance," I read. The text was dense, but the meaning was clear. "Hereby transferred into the sole ownership of the Elias Thorne Historical Preservation Trust. Said items, including but not limited to the commissioned Colt 1911 firearms, serial numbers X and Y, the ceremonial sword, and all personal correspondence and field journals, are to be held in trust. The custodial rights are granted to Robert Thorne on a temporary basis, subject to strict conditions of preservation, until such time as the primary beneficiary, Naomi Thorne, reaches the age of 30. I looked up, my heart hammering against my ribs. A trust. I thought they were just part of the estate. Robert and Sylvia thought so too, Evelyn said, a thin, cruel smile playing on her lips. Because we never told them otherwise. The general wanted to give them a chance. He wanted to believe that they would respect his memory out of love, not out of legal obligation, but he prepared for the alternative. So they didn't inherit them. I realized. The magnitude of the situation sinking in. They were just borrowing them. They were custodians, Evelyn corrected. Glorified museum guards. And you, my dear, became the sole trustee and legal owner on your 30th birthday 2 years ago. I did not enforce the transfer of possession because you were overseas, and I thought the items were safer in the house where he lived than in a storage unit. I was wrong. She leaned back, tenting her fingers. Do you understand what this means? Naomi, in the eyes of the law, your parents did not sell their own property. They stole property belonging to a federally registered charitable trust. And because the firearms are fully automatic capable antiques that were never transferred to the new owner, the dealer they have also violated the National Firearms Act. Felonies, I whispered. Multiple felonies. Evelyn agreed. Embezzlement, grand larceny, trafficking in stolen goods, fraud. If we went to the FBI tonight, your parents would be in handcuffs by sunrise. Then let's do it, I said, standing up. Let's call the FBI. Graves can drive me to the field office. Sit down. Evelyn's voice cracked like a whip. I froze. I sat back down. You are thinking like a brawler, she said, shaking her head. You want to throw a punch? I want to win the war. If we arrest them now, they play the victims. They claim ignorance. They claim it was a misunderstanding between family members. They hire a lawyer who spins a sob story about financial hardship, and they get a slap on the wrist and probation. And we look like the heartless monsters who sent our own family to jail over some old guns. So what do? We let them dig, Evelyn said. They have just sold the items. They are feeling flush with cash. They feel safe. They think the clutter is gone, and they have won. We need to let them commit to the lie. We need them to put it in writing. She opened the file further and pulled out a second document. It was a draft of a letter. This is the next phase. I call it Operation Winter. The general named it before he died. He said, If they sell my soul, Evelyn, bring the winter down on them. I looked at the plan. It was not a sudden strike. It was a siege. Step 1, Evelyn explained, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We do not tell them about the trust yet. We let them think they got away with it. We hire a third party to approach the buyer, this illegal dealer. We spook him. We make him realize he has purchased stolen federal property. We turn the criminals against each other. And the parents? We send them a letter from the trust's lawyers, she said. Not an accusation, a routine audit. We ask them to certify, in writing, under penalty of perjury, that the items are still in their possession and in good condition for tax purposes. We give them a chance to lie to the federal government. I understood immediately. It was a perjury trap. If they tell the truth, I said, they admit to selling the items and lose the money. If they lie to cover it up, Evelyn finished. They commit federal wire fraud and tax evasion. They will sign their own death warrants. And knowing your parents, knowing their arrogance and their desperate need to keep that money for their Europe trip and that ridiculous car, they will lie. She closed the file and placed her hand on top of it. Anger is a fire, Naomi. It burns hot, but it burns out. I need you to be ice. I need you to go back to your life. Answer their calls if they ring. Be polite. Be distant. Let them think you have accepted their business decision. Let them spend the money. Let them drive the car. Let them feel the victory. It will be hard, I admitted. Knowing what they did. It is the price of total victory, Evelyn said. We are not just taking back the guns. Naomi, we are taking back the house. We are taking back the money. We are taking back the name they have tarnished. By the time we are done, that Tesla will be government property, and your brother will be lucky if he can get a job scrubbing toilets. She looked at the chessboard again. She reached out and moved a white bishop, taking the black knight she had moved earlier. They sacrificed a queen to save a pawn, she murmured. Foolish. She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of emotion in her eyes. It was not sadness. It was a fierce, protective pride. "You are the head of this family now. Naomi, not them. You carry the general's blood. Act like it. Go upstairs. Sleep. Tomorrow. We initiate the audit. Tomorrow. The winter begins." I stood up, feeling a shift in my own center of gravity. The helpless rage I had felt standing in the driveway was gone. It had been replaced by the cold, heavy weight of the file on the desk. I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was the trustee. "Yes, grandmother," I said. "And Naomi." "Yes." "When we get the diary back," she said, her voice wavering slightly for the first time. "I want to read the entry from Christmas, 1944. He wrote it in Bastogne. He told me once he wrote about the snow. I will find it," I promised, "even if I have to tear that dealer's house apart with my bare hands." "Let the lawyers do the tearing," she said, regaining her composure. "We keep our hands clean. Go." I left the library. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like a coiled spring. I walked up the grand staircase to the guest wing, the file tucked under my arm. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the window panes. A storm was coming. But inside, the plan was already in motion. My parents were celebrating their windfall, drinking their wine, planning their Italian vacation. They had no idea that they were already dead. They just hadn't stopped moving yet. The silence I imposed on my family was not passive. It was tactical. For the next 3 weeks, I returned to my office at Blackridge Solutions, sitting in a glass-walled room on the 45th floor overlooking the Potomac, negotiating kidnapping insurance policies for oil executives in Nigeria. To my colleagues, I was the same Naomi Thorne as always, meticulous, unshakable, perhaps a little more focused than usual. To my parents and brother, I was a ghost. I had blocked their numbers. I had filtered their emails to a folder I never opened. I let them believe that I had walked away into the night, defeated, another casualty of their steamroller ambition. But while I was physically in my office, my digital self was hovering over their lives like a drone. My grandmother, Evelyn, had been right. Anger was a crude fuel. Patience was nuclear. We did not need to break into the house to find evidence of their incompetence. They broadcast it to the world every single day. Leo was the primary leak. My brother had mistaken the internet for a mirror, believing it only reflected what he wanted it to see. He did not understand that the internet is actually a ledger. He had created a new TikTok account dedicated entirely to the Tesla. Naming the car the Red Baron, I sat at my desk late one Tuesday night, the office empty save for the cleaning crew, and watched a video he had uploaded 2 hours prior. The camera angle was shaky, mounted to the dashboard. The speedometer was clearly visible in the digital display. Leo was driving on Route 1, a road with a speed limit of 45 miles per hour. The digital numbers on the dash were climbing rapidly. 60, 80, 100. "Check this torque, guys." Leo screamed over the high-pitched whine of the electric motors. "We are gapping everything on the road. This is what success looks like." He swerved into the oncoming lane to pass a minivan, cutting back in with inches to spare. The comments section was a mix of sycophants cheering him on and people tagging the Connecticut State Police. Leo deleted the negative comments as fast as they appeared, but he was not fast enough for me. I hit the record button on my screen capture software. I saved the video, the timestamp, and the metadata. I logged it into a secure folder named Project Winter. This was not just a traffic violation. It was evidence of reckless endangerment using an asset obtained through fraud. It established a pattern of behavior. I scrolled down. There were other videos. One showed him doing donuts in a church parking lot at 2 a.m, leaving black rubber circles on the pavement. Another showed him laughing as he backed the car into a plastic trash can, denting the rear bumper. "Oops," he had captioned it. "Guess I need better sensors. Daddy will fix it." I archived that one too. Every scratch on that car was a depreciation of the asset that was about to be seized. But more importantly, it was proof that the investment my father claimed to have made was actually a liability, while I monitored the digital front. Evelyn was moving pieces on the physical board. She had not become a federal judge by being nice. She had done it by knowing exactly which lever to pull to make a structure collapse. She had reached into her past and pulled out a man named Vance. Vance was a private investigator, but that title felt too pedestrian for what he actually did. He was a forensic accountant with a badge and a background in recovering art stolen by Nazis and cartels. He did not look like a detective. He looked like a weary college professor, complete with tweed jackets and wire-rimmed glasses. This was his greatest camouflage. Evelyn had tasked him with locating the buyer. It had taken Vance less than 48 hours. My father, in his infinite sloppiness, had left a digital footprint of the transaction. He had deposited the cash in 3 separate tranches to avoid the $10,000 reporting threshold. A technique known as structuring. It was illegal, but that was a charge for later. The withdrawal slips from the buyer's end, however, led Vance to a shell company registered in Delaware, which led to a warehouse in Baltimore. The buyer was a man named Arthur Sterling. Sterling was a known entity in the underground world of militaria. He was the kind of man who sold Nazi daggers to hedge fund managers and stolen colonial muskets to tech billionaires. He was wealthy, paranoid, and terrified of one thing: federal prison. He operated in the gray zone, relying on the fact that most families did not report Grandpa's missing war trophies because they didn't have the paperwork. But we had the paperwork. On a Thursday morning, Vance paid Mr. Sterling a visit. He did not go as a cop. He went as a freelance writer for a niche magazine called The Collector's Quarterly. I was not there. But Vance's report was detailed enough that I could see the scene perfectly. Sterling's shop was in the back of an industrial park, unmarked. Vance walked in, feigning awe at the collection of rusted bayonets and flintlock pistols. He struck up a conversation, flattering Sterling's eye for quality. Then, he dropped the bait. "I heard a rumor," Vance had said, adjusting his glasses. "Word is that a pristine set of Colt 1911s, General Officer issue, just hit the market, ivory grips, presidential inscription, General Elias Thorne's personal sidearms. I am writing a piece on lost World War II treasures. You wouldn't happen to know where they landed, would you?" Sterling, according to the report, had gone pale. He denied it immediately. "I don't deal in stolen goods," he had stammered. "Oh, I didn't say they were stolen," Vance replied smoothly. "Although I did check the National Archives and the Thorne Preservation Trust Registry. Funny thing, the trust lists those items as permanent collection, non-transferable. If someone bought them, they bought federal property. That is a 10-year sentence, minimum, and since they are fully automatic capable well, the ATF usually raids first and asks questions later." Vance left his business card and walked out. The seed was planted. Sterling was now holding a grenade with the pin pulled. He knew he had been duped by my parents. He knew the items were hot. His instinct would be to hide them, or better yet, force the sellers to take them back. But he couldn't go to the police because he was already an accomplice. He was trapped. This was the pressure cooker. Now, we needed to light the fuse under my parents. The following Monday, the trap arrived in my parents' mailbox. It was a letter. It was printed on thick, cream-colored bond paper with the letterhead of Halloway Finch and Thorne, Evelyn's old firm, where she was still a silent partner, but the letter did not come from her. It came from the Estate Planning and Compliance Division. The genius of the letter was its banality. It did not accuse them of theft. It did not mention the sale. It did not even mention the Tesla. It read, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Thorne, as part of the decennial audit of the Elias Thorne Historical Preservation Trust, we are required to update our records regarding the physical condition and location of all assets currently under your custodianship. This is a routine procedure to ensure compliance with IRS regulations regarding the tax-exempt status of the trust. Please review the attached schedule of assets, specifically Item 4, a Colt 1911 set, and Item 4B ceremonial sword. Please sign the attached affidavit confirming that these items remain in your secure possession at the primary residence and have not been transferred, sold, or altered. Failure to confirm possession may result in a full physical audit by an independent actuary and potential reevaluation of the estate's tax liability for the years 2015 through 2025. Please return the signed affidavit within 5 business days. It was the perfect bureaucratic nightmare. If they told the truth that they had sold the items, they would be admitting to selling assets that did not belong to them. They would be liable for the full market value of the items, plus penalties, and they would be hit with a capital gains tax bill on the $120,000 they had just received. But my parents did not fear the law as much as they feared losing money. In their minds, they had already spent the cash. The Tesla was in the driveway. The tickets to Italy were booked. They could not afford to pay the tax, let alone buy the guns back from Sterling, who would surely charge them double now. So, they did exactly what Evelyn predicted. They chose the path that looked like the easiest way out, not realizing it led directly off a cliff. I was sitting in my apartment on Friday evening when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Evelyn. It contained a single image. It was a scan of the affidavit. At the bottom of the page, in blue ink, were 2 signatures, Robert Thorne, Sylvia Thorne, next to the checkbox that said, "I hereby certify under penalty of perjury that the listed items are currently in my possession and housed at the address of record." They had checked the box. I stared at the screen. My heart rate did not spike. Instead, a profound sense of cold satisfaction settled over me. By signing that piece of paper and dropping it in the mail, they had crossed the line from being merely awful parents to being federal criminals. This was no longer a family dispute. It was mail fraud. It was wire fraud. It was perjury. And because the value of the fraud exceeded $100,000, the sentencing guidelines were severe. They had lied to a law firm. They had lied to a trust. And effectively, they had lied to the IRS. I zoomed in on the date next to my father's signature. He had signed it yesterday, probably at the kitchen table, perhaps with a glass of wine in hand, laughing about how they had outsmarted the bureaucrats. "Just sign it, Robert," I could imagine my mother saying. "Who is going to check the old man is dead, and Naomi is busy playing soldier? Nobody cares about those old guns." They had no idea that the bureaucrat they were trying to fool was the woman who had taught them how to read. I opened my laptop and pulled up the live feed of Leo's Instagram. He was live again. He was at a gas station, leaning against the Tesla, pumping air into the tires. "Yo, what's up, everyone?" he was saying, chewing gum loudly. "Just getting the spaceship ready for the weekend. We are hitting the city tonight. Dad just closed a huge deal, so we are celebrating. Life is good, baby. Life is easy when you are a winner." I watched him preen. I watched him smile that vacant, arrogant smile. "Enjoy it, Leo," I whispered to the empty room. "Enjoy the victory lap." I closed the laptop. The preparation phase was over. We had the evidence of the theft, the empty case. We had the evidence of the sale, the bank transfers Vance had traced. We had the evidence of the cover-up, the signed affidavit, and we had the buyer, Sterling, who was sweating bullets and ready to flip on them to save his own skin. Evelyn's plan was a machine, and the gears were grinding forward with terrifying precision. I poured myself a glass of water and walked to the window. The city lights of D.C. twinkled below me. Somewhere out there, in the suburbs of Connecticut, my parents were sleeping soundly, believing they had gotten away with it. They thought the silence from me was submission. They thought the letter from the law firm was just paperwork. They did not hear the sound of the trap snapping shut. The next morning, the invitations went out. Robert and Sylvia were throwing a party, a celebration of success, they called it. It was ostensibly for Leo's birthday. But really, it was a showcase for the Tesla and their renewed liquidity. They invited the entire neighborhood. They invited their country club friends. They invited the very people whose validation they craved like oxygen, and in a stroke of hubris that defied explanation, they invited me. The invitation arrived via email. "Naomi, darling, We know things were tense when you visited, but we want to move past it. We are so proud of Leo, and we want the whole family together. Please come. It will be a night to remember." I read it twice. A night to remember. I forwarded the email to Evelyn with a 2-word note, "I'm going." Her reply came back instantly. "Wear black." I leaned back in my chair. The stage was set. The players were in position. The trap was primed. All that was left was to walk into the lion's den and watch the walls come down. I closed my eyes and pictured the white roses crushed under the red tires. "See you soon, Mother," I said. "See you soon." The instructions from my grandmother were precise, delivered with the cold finality of a commanding officer briefing a soldier before a covert operation. "Go to the party," Evelyn had said, her voice crackling slightly over the secure line. "Do not wear a party dress. Do not wear a cocktail gown. If you can fit into the general's dress blues, wear them. If not, wear black. Severe black. You are not there to celebrate a birthday, Naomi. You are there to be the chief mourner at the funeral of their freedom." I did not fit into the general's uniform. His shoulders were broader than mine, but I found the next best thing. I wore a tailored black suit, the fabric matte and absorbing the light, a silk shirt buttoned to the throat, and the same heavy combat boots I had worn the day I arrived. I slicked my hair back. I wore no jewelry. I looked like an executioner who had stopped by for a drink. The invitation said 7 in the evening. I arrived at 8. My parents' house had been transformed into a spectacle that could only be described as a desperate hallucination of wealth. The theme was, "The future is here," which apparently meant draping the entire front lawn in silver synthetic fabric and hiring a DJ to blast bass-heavy electronic music that rattled the windows of the neighbors 3 houses down. But the centerpiece, the altar at which everyone was expected to worship, was the Tesla. It was parked in the center of the driveway, illuminated by 4 spotlights that cut through the humid Connecticut night. It was surrounded by a red velvet rope, the kind you see at nightclubs, effectively turning a mass-produced electric vehicle into a museum exhibit. The irony was so thick I could taste it. They had sold a literal museum piece unique, historical, priceless to put a velvet rope around a car that thousands of other people bought every single week. I handed my car keys to the valet, a teenager who looked terrified of my outfit, and walked up the driveway. The crowd was exactly who I expected it to be. It was a collection of my parents' friends' people who measured their self-worth by the square footage of their homes and the labels on their handbags. There were men in pastel polo shirts discussing capital gains tax, and women with frozen foreheads sipping champagne, their eyes scanning the perimeter to see who was wearing what. I moved through them like a shark swimming through a school of neon tetras. The air smelled of expensive perfume and ozone from the fog machine that was pumping smoke around the Tesla. "Naomi!" The voice was shrill, cutting through the thumping bass. I turned to see my mother, Sylvia, intercepting me before I could reach the bar. She was wearing a dress that looked like it was made of aluminum foil, a shimmering, silver thing that was far too tight and far too young for her. She had glitter in her hair. She looked like a disco ball that was afraid of being turned off. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my bicep. Her smile was plastered on, wide and manic, but her eyes were darting around nervously. "You came," she hissed, keeping her voice low so the woman in the Gucci dress next to us wouldn't hear. "And you are wearing that? I told you the theme was the future, Naomi. You look like you are going to a funeral." "I thought it was appropriate," I said, my voice calm and even. "Black goes with everything, even bankruptcy." Sylvia flinched, her grip tightening. "Stop it. Do not start with your negativity tonight. This is Leo's night. This is our night. Everyone is here. Naomi, the Potters, the Davises, even Robert's partners from the firm. We are celebrating. If you say one word about the items or try to cause a scene, I will have security escort you out. Do you understand?" I looked down at her hand on my arm, then up at her eyes. I didn't pull away. I just stared until she let go. "I am not here to make a scene, Mother," I said. "I am just here to watch the show." I hear the finale is going to be spectacular. Good, she said, smoothing her metallic dress, seemingly reassured by my passivity. Just mingle, try to look successful, and for God's sake, smile. She spun around and fluttered away to greet a couple who had just arrived, her laugh tinkling artificially above the music. I walked to the edge of the driveway, near the velvet rope. Leo was there, of course. He was sitting on the hood of the Tesla again, holding a bottle of champagne that was almost certainly too expensive for his palate. He was surrounded by a posse of hangers-on. Friends from college who were dressed in futuristic streetwear, all of them filming him with their phones. 0 to 60 in 1.9 seconds. Bro, Leo was shouting, slapping the fender of the car. It pulls so hard your vision blurs. It is like being in a rocket ship. Dad said I earned it. He said the Thorne family is all about speed and innovation. That is sick, Leo, one of his friends said. Your dad is a legend. Yeah, he is, Leo agreed, taking a swig from the bottle. We made some big moves this quarter, reallocated some assets. You know how it is. Out with the old, in with the new. I watched him, feeling a strange detachment. He was talking about reallocating assets, as if he were a hedge fund manager, when in reality, he was a thief who had fenced his grandfather's honor. He looked happy. He looked triumphant. He had no idea that the phone in his pocket, the one he was using to broadcast his glory, was the same device that had provided the GPS data cementing his timeline for the federal investigators. I turned away from the spectacle and found a spot in the shadows near the patio doors. From here, I had a clear view of the entire driveway and the front gate. This was the sniper's perch. I accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter and waited. My father, Robert, was holding court near the outdoor bar. He was wearing a white dinner jacket that made him look like a waiter on a cruise ship. He was gesturing expansively with a cigar, talking to a man I recognized as a local real estate developer. I drifted closer, staying out of his direct line of sight. It is all about liquidity, Robert was saying, his voice booming with unearned confidence. You cannot let capital sit in dead weight. I had this collection heirlooms. Sure, but just dust collectors. I told Sylvia, why are we sitting on this when we could be leveraging it? So I made the call. Sold at the peak of the market. Cash deal. Bam. Now we have the car. We have the trip to Europe booked, and we still have capital to play with. That is how you build wealth. Jim, you have to be ruthless with sentimentality. Smart move. Robert, the developer nodded. Very smart. You always had a nose for the deal. I try, Robert chuckled, taking a puff of his cigar. I try. I checked my watch. It was 8:45. According to the schedule Evelyn had arranged, the hammer was due to drop in exactly 3 minutes. The party was reaching its crescendo. The DJ had transitioned into a high-energy remix of a popular pop song. The fog machine was working overtime. Leo was now revving the engine of the Tesla remotely, making the car hum and flash its lights like a possessed robot, drawing oohs and ahs from the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, Leo shouted over the music, standing up on the bumper, my dad just told me we are going to fire this baby up and take a few people for a launch control demo down the block. Who wants to go first? A cheer went up from the crowd. Hands raised. People surged forward against the velvet rope. And then, the music stopped. It wasn't a fade-out. It was a cut. The silence that slammed into the yard was sudden and jarring. The guests looked around, confused. Leo froze on the bumper, looking at the DJ booth. Yo, what the hell? Leo yelled. Drop the beat back in. But the DJ wasn't looking at his mixer. He was looking at the front gate. Everyone turned. The driveway was long, winding up from the street, and it was currently blocked by the valet stand and a line of guests' luxury sedans. But pushing past the line, ignoring the frantic waving of the valet, was a vehicle that definitely did not belong at a future-themed party. It was a large, matte black transport van. It had no chrome, no styling, no aesthetic. It was a utilitarian block of steel with government plates and tinted windows. It looked like a hearse designed for a riot. It rolled up the driveway, the tires crunching heavily on the gravel, and pulled to a stop directly perpendicular to the Tesla, effectively blocking it in. The guests murmured. A few people laughed nervously. "Is this part of the show?" someone asked near me. "Is it a SWAT team stripper thing?" "That must be it," another woman giggled. "Oh, Robert is so creative. Look at that truck. It is so dramatic." Robert and Sylvia were standing near the bar, looking confused. This was not on the invoice. Robert took a step forward, his smile wavering but still in place. All right, Robert shouted, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Very funny. Leo, did you order a surprise for your old man who is in the van?" The side door of the van slid open with a heavy mechanical rasp that echoed in the silence. No music played, no smoke machine puffed. 3 men stepped out. They were not strippers. They were not dancers. They were not actors. They were wearing gray tactical vests over suits, with gold badges clipped to their belts and identifying lettering across their backs in bold yellow US. Behind them stepped a woman in a sharp navy suit, carrying a leather portfolio case. It was Evelyn's personal attorney, a shark named Ms. Sterling, no relation to the dealer who was known in DSC as the Scalpel. The laughter in the crowd died instantly. The air grew tight, sucking the oxygen out of the frantic festivity. Leo slid off the hood of the Tesla, his face going pale. "Dad," he squeaked. "Dad, who are these guys?" The lead marshal, a man with a buzz cut and a face carved out of granite, walked straight up to the velvet rope. He didn't unhook it. He stepped over it. He walked up to the Tesla, placed a heavy hand on the red hood, and looked directly at Leo. "Step away from the vehicle," the marshal said. His voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the yard. "This vehicle is now seized evidence in a federal investigation." "What?" Leo stammered, backing up. "No, you can't. This is my car. My dad bought it. It is my birthday." Sylvia let out a high-pitched shriek and ran across the lawn, her silver dress rustling. Excuse me. What is the meaning of this? You are ruining my party. Get your hands off my son's car. Do you know who we are?" The marshal ignored her. He turned to his partner. "Secure the asset. Key fob is with the suspect." The second marshal moved toward Leo. "Sir, hand over the key fob. Now." Robert finally found his voice. He stormed over, his face flushing a deep, dangerous red. "Now see here. This is private property. You cannot just barge in here with costumes and demand things. I will call the police." Ms. Sterling, the attorney, stepped forward. She didn't shout. She just held up a piece of paper. It was a court order, signed by a federal judge that afternoon. "Mr. Robert Thorne," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a razor. "This is a warrant in rem for the seizure of assets derived from criminal activity, specifically the theft and illicit sale of property belonging to the Elias Thorne Historical Preservation Trust, the Tesla Model S, VIN, ending in 459, is listed as collateral purchased with the proceeds of that theft." The crowd gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sounded like a hiss. "Theft," Robert spluttered. "That is insane. I sold my own property. That trust is just a formality. It is my house." "Actually, Ms. Sterling continued, flipping a page, "we are also executing a warrant for the seizure of all electronic devices belonging to Robert and Sylvia Thorne, pursuant to an investigation into wire fraud, mail fraud, and perjury regarding the affidavit you signed and mailed on Tuesday." She looked at Sylvia, who had gone dead white, her glittery makeup standing out like bruises on her pale skin. "You certified under penalty of perjury that the Colt firearms and the ceremonial sword were in your possession." "Ms. Sterling said, "We have a sworn statement from a Mr. Arthur Sterling in Baltimore that he purchased them from you for $120,000 in cash. That is a federal crime." "Mrs. Thorne." The silence that followed was absolute. The guests were frozen. The phones that had been filming Leo were now turned toward my parents. live streaming their destruction to the very audience they had tried so hard to impress. "Leo," the marshal said again. "The keys." Leo looked at his father. Robert was staring at the attorney, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. He had no answers. The confident businessman who knew how to leverage assets had vanished, replaced by a terrified man in a white dinner jacket. Leo looked at his mother. Sylvia was clutching her chest, looking like she was about to faint. Then Leo looked at the crowd. He saw the phones. He saw the judgment. He saw the end of his brand. "It wasn't me," Leo screamed, his voice cracking. "I didn't sell them. Ask them. They did it. I just wanted the car. Don't arrest me." He threw the key fob at the marshal. It hit the marshal in the chest and bounced onto the gravel. "Secure him," the marshal said calmly. "Obstruction and disorderly conduct." The second marshal grabbed Leo's arm. Leo tried to pull away, flailing, and in one smooth motion, he was spun around and pressed against the side of his beloved Tesla. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed across the lawn. Click, click, click. "No, no, don't scratch the paint," Leo wailed, his face pressed against the red metal. Sylvia screamed again, a raw, ugly sound. "Robert, do something." Robert turned to the marshal, pulling out his wallet. "Officer, look, there must be a mistake. A fine I can pay, a fine. How much is it? Let's just settle this right now." He was trying to bribe a U.S. Marshal in front of 50 witnesses and a camera crew. The lead marshal looked at the wallet with disgust. "Sir, put that away before I add bribery to your charge sheet. Step back." I stood in the shadows by the patio door, sipping my sparkling water. The ice cubes clinked softly against the glass. I watched the scene unfold with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a chemical reaction. The volatility of their greed had finally met the catalyst of the law. Robert looked around wildly, searching for an ally, for someone to save him. His eyes scanned the crowd of friends, but they were all stepping back, averting their gazes, distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout of the Thorne family. Then, his eyes found me. I was standing perfectly still in my black suit. The only person not looking shocked or confused. I raised my glass slightly in a silent toast. His eyes widened. The realization hit him. The timing, the letter, the audit, the silence. He looked at Sylvia, and I saw her lips move as she looked at me too. I couldn't hear what she said, but I could read the shape of the word. Naomi. The tow truck was backing up the driveway now, its backup alarm beeping in a steady, rhythmic countdown. Beep, beep, beep. The party was over. The masquerade had ended, and the lights had been turned on, revealing exactly what was underneath the silver fabric and the neon lights, nothing but rot. I finished my water, set the glass on a passing tray, and turned to walk back inside the house. I had seen enough. The performance was excellent, but I had work to do in the morning. I had a legacy to rebuild. The arrival of the black van was the initial shock, but what followed was a surgical dismantling of my family's social existence. Performed with the precision of a public autopsy, I had moved from the shadows of the patio to the second-floor balcony of the master bedroom. It was a strategic vantage point that offered a theater box view of the driveway. From up here, the guests looked like ants in expensive clothing, scattering and swirling in confusion, while the marshals moved like iron wedges, splitting the crowd apart. The music had died, but the noise of the party had been replaced by a low, buzzing murmur of panic and the mechanical growl of the tow truck's winch. Ms. Sterling, Evelyn's attorney, stepped into the center of the spotlight that had been meant for the Tesla. She did not need a microphone. Her voice was trained for courtrooms, capable of projecting authority to the back row of a gallery. She held the warrant in rem in her hand, the paper fluttering slightly in the night breeze. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling announced, her tone cutting through the murmur, "I advise you to step back. This property is now an active crime scene under the jurisdiction of the Federal District Court." The phrase crime scene rippled through the crowd like an electric shock. The guests, who minutes ago had been sipping champagne and envying my parents, began to recoil. "This is ridiculous!" Sylvia shrieked, rushing toward Sterling. "You are scaring our guests. This is a misunderstanding." "My husband is a respected businessman." Sterling turned to face my mother. She did not flinch. She simply raised the document higher. "There is no misunderstanding, Mrs. Thorne," Sterling said, loud enough for the neighbors 3 blocks away to hear. "This vehicle, a Tesla Model S Plaid, was purchased with funds directly traced to the illegal sale of historical artifacts stolen from the Elias Thorne Historical Preservation Trust. It is not a car. It is evidence of grand larceny and money laundering." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "Stolen," a woman in a sequined dress whispered near the front. "Did she say stolen?" "From a veteran's trust," a man echoed, disgust coloring his voice. Leo, who was currently pinned against the side of the car by the first marshal, suddenly found a reserve of hysterical strength. The reality of losing his status symbol was hitting him harder than the reality of the handcuffs. He began to thrash, his face contorted into a mask of spoiled rage. "You are liars," Leo screamed, spittle flying from his mouth. "My grandfather gave us that stuff. It was ours. Get your hands off my paint. You are scratching the ceramic coating." He twisted his body, managing to break the marshal's grip for a fraction of a second, in a moment of pure, unadulterated stupidity. Leo shoved the federal officer. It was not a hard shove, just a desperate flailing of limbs. But he made contact with the marshal's chest. That was the end of Leo Thorne. The influencer, the marshal did not stumble. He reacted with practiced efficiency. He swept Leo's legs out from under him, driving him face first into the gravel driveway. The sound of expensive designer jeans tearing and skin meeting stone was audible even from the balcony. "Federal officer, stop resisting!" the marshal roared. He pulled Leo's arms behind his back with force, ratcheting the zip ties tight. Leo let out a howl that sounded less like a man and more like a wounded animal. "Ow, you are hurting me, Dad. Dad, make them stop." But Robert could not make them stop. Robert was currently trying to make himself invisible. He was backing away toward the hydrangeas, his face the color of old paper. Sylvia, however, chose this moment to self-destruct. Seeing her golden boy face down in the dirt, she lost all semblance of the poised socialite. She lunged at Ms. Sterling, her finger pointing accusingly. "This is my house," Sylvia yelled, her voice shredding. "You have no right. We signed the papers. We sent the affidavit. Everything is legal. Get off my property before I sue you into oblivion." Sterling smiled. It was a terrifying, shark-like smile. She reached into her leather portfolio and pulled out a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside was the document my parents had signed only days ago. "The affidavit?" Sterling asked, her voice dripping with mock politeness. "You mean this document? The one where you swore under penalty of perjury that the Colt pistols and the sword were still in your safe possession." She held the bag up to the light. The signature was clearly visible. "We have the buyer, Mrs. Thorne," Sterling declared, turning to address the crowd of stunned onlookers. "We have the wire transfers, and now, thanks to this document you mailed via the United States Postal Service, we have proof of federal mail fraud and perjury. You didn't just sell stolen goods, you lied to the government to cover it up." The crowd gasped. This was the turning point. Until this moment, the guests might have thought this was a civil dispute, a family squabble gone wrong, but mail fraud and perjury were words that carried the stench of prison. I watched as the phones came out. It started with 1 or 2 of Leo's friends, the ones who had been cheering him on moments ago. They lifted their devices, not to call for help, but to record. Then the neighbors joined in, then the business partners. Within seconds, a wall of camera lenses was pointed at my parents. The flashes went off like strobes, illuminating Sylvia's horrified face and Leo's gravel-rashed cheek. They were live streaming the downfall. I could almost see the captions being typed in real-time: Thorn scandal, federal raid karma. "Stop filming," Sylvia screamed, shielding her face with her hands. "Stop it. We are your friends. Friends don't steal from veterans' charities." "Sylvia," a woman said coldly, lowering her phone but keeping the camera rolling. The tow truck driver, a burly man who clearly just wanted to get his job done, engaged the winch. The cable tightened with a metallic groan. The Tesla, the symbol of their future, was dragged backward. Its rear tires were locked, leaving long black skid marks on the pristine driveway, a permanent scar on the landscape they had tried so hard to perfect. Leo, still pinned to the ground, lifted his head. "No, no, please, not the car. Take anything else. Take the house. Don't take the car." His priorities were laid bare for everyone to see. He was willing to sacrifice the roof over his head for the battery-powered ego boost. Robert Thorne, seeing his son on the ground and his wife being encircled by the press of accusations, made his final, fatal error. He walked up to the lead marshal, the one who was currently reading Leo his Miranda rights. I leaned over the railing, watching closely. I knew my father. I knew he believed that every man had a price. He reached into the inside pocket of his white dinner jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. It was the emergency cash he always kept for greasing wheels. "Officer," Robert said, his voice trembling but low, trying to be discreet. "Look, this is a big misunderstanding. My son is a good kid. We can fix this. There is $5,000 in here. Just let's release the cuffs. Let the tow truck go, and we can discuss this like gentlemen inside." He held the envelope out. The marshal stopped reading. He looked at the envelope. He looked at Robert. Then, he looked directly at the crowd of recording phones. "Sir," the marshal boomed, his voice projecting like a cannon shot, "did you just attempt to offer me a cash bribe to interfere with a federal investigation?" Robert froze. "No, I was just—" "Step back," the marshal shouted, his hand dropping to his holster. "Turn around, hands behind your back." "What? No," Robert stammered. "I am Robert Thorne. I am a partner at—" "I don't care who you are," the marshal said, spinning Robert around. He didn't have a second pair of cuffs ready, so he used a heavy plastic zip tie from his belt. He cinched it around Robert's wrists with a sharp zip sound that signaled the end of my father's career. "Robert Thorne, you are under arrest for attempted bribery of a federal officer, in addition to the pending charges of conspiracy and fraud." The crowd erupted. The shock had turned into a frenzy of gossip and judgment. This was better than reality TV. This was the destruction of a dynasty in high definition. "Robert," Sylvia wailed, looking from her husband to her son, both restrained, both ruined. She stood alone in the center of the driveway, her silver dress shimmering pointlessly under the harsh spotlights. She looked around for support, but the circle of guests had widened, leaving her isolated on an island of shame. The tow truck driver finished securing the Tesla. With a loud clank of gears, the bed tilted up, and the red car was hoisted into the air. It looked like a dead beast being carted away. As the truck began to pull out, the crowd parted, not out of respect, but to avoid being associated with the wreckage. I took a slow sip of the wine I had brought up from the kitchen. It was a vintage red, one of the bottles Robert had bought to celebrate the sale. It tasted of oak and irony. From my perch on the balcony, I looked down. The scene was chaotic, loud, and ugly. The blue and red lights of local police cruisers were now joining the fray, adding a strobe effect to the nightmare. And then, amidst the swirling lights and the shouting, Sylvia looked up. Perhaps she felt my gaze. Perhaps some maternal instinct, long dormant and atrophied, told her where I was. She looked past the marshals, past the flashing cameras, up to the dark balcony where I stood in the shadows. Her eyes met mine. Even from this distance, I could see the terror in them. It wasn't just fear of the law. It was the terrifying realization of who had orchestrated this. She saw me standing there, calm, untouched, watching her world burn with a glass of wine in my hand. She saw the black suit. She saw the resemblance to the general. Her mouth opened, forming my name, but no sound came out that could reach me over the chaos. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I simply held her gaze for 3 long seconds, letting her see that I was not the daughter she had dismissed. I was the judgment she had invited. I raised the glass slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the debt being paid. Then, I turned my back on her. I walked back into the master bedroom, the sound of her screaming my name finally cutting through the night air, only to be drowned out by the slam of the balcony door. The party was over. The cleanup was just beginning. The hangover from the party lasted exactly 48 hours, but the legal headache that followed was designed to be chronic. The silence of the house was replaced by the deafening noise of bureaucracy. It was not the loud, chaotic noise of the raid. It was the dry, rustling sound of paper shuffling, the clicking of paralegals' keyboards, and the ringing of phones that went unanswered because the lines had been disconnected for non-payment. 3 days after the raid, the venue changed. We were no longer on the manicured lawn of the Greenwich estate. We were in the Shark Tank. My grandmother, Evelyn Thorne, did not come to the house. She did not offer the comfort of a familiar setting. Instead, she summoned my parents and Leo to the downtown offices of Halloway. Finch and Thorne. It was a power move. This was her turf, a glass and steel monolith where she was not just a grandmother, but a silent partner whose name was etched into the brass plaque in the lobby. I arrived early. I sat in the main conference room, a space dominated by a table long enough to land a small aircraft on. I watched through the glass walls as my family arrived. They looked like refugees from a lifestyle magazine that had gone out of print. Robert was wearing a suit that had clearly been slept in. His white dinner jacket from the party was likely tagged as evidence somewhere in a federal locker. Sylvia was wearing oversized sunglasses indoors, hiding eyes that were undoubtedly swollen from crying. Leo, out on bail, slouched behind them, wearing a hoodie with the hood pulled up, looking less like a tech entrepreneur and more like a sullen teenager who had been grounded for life. They were ushered into the room by Ms. Sterling, the attorney who had served them the warrant. She did not offer them coffee. She gestured to the chairs on the opposite side of the table from me. I did not stand up. I did not say hello. I sat with my hands folded on the polished mahogany, waiting. The door at the far end of the room opened, and Evelyn rolled in. Her wheelchair was electric, and the hum of its motor was the only sound in the room. She maneuvered herself to the head of the table, locked the wheels, and placed a single file folder on the surface. "Sit up, Robert," Evelyn said. Her voice was devoid of warmth. "You look like a vagrant." Robert straightened his spine instinctively, a reflex from a childhood spent fearing this woman. "Mother, please, you have to stop this. The accounts are frozen. My credit cards were declined at the parking garage. I had to borrow cash from Leo's bail money just to pay the attendant. Your assets have been frozen pursuant to a federal investigation into wire fraud and money laundering," Ms. Sterling interjected, remaining standing. "That is standard procedure when the source of funds is in question, but that is the least of your worries." "The least?" Sylvia choked out, removing her sunglasses to reveal terrified, red-rimmed eyes. "We have no money. Evelyn, we cannot buy food. We cannot pay the staff. The gardener quit this morning because his check bounced." "Then mow your own lawn," Evelyn said. "But before you worry about the grass, you should worry about Mr. Arthur Sterling." Robert paled. "The buyer. What about him?" "Mr. Sterling is a criminal," Miss Sterling explained, opening the file. "But he is a smart criminal. The moment he realized the items he purchased were stolen federal property and that he was facing possession charges, he flipped. He is claiming he was a victim of your fraud. He claims he had no idea the items belonged to a trust. He is suing you, Robert, civilly." "He can't sue me," Robert spluttered. "He is a black market dealer." "He is a businessman with excellent lawyers," Mrs. Sterling corrected. "He is suing for breach of contract and fraud. And because the fraud was intentional, proven by that affidavit you signed, He is seeking treble damages. Do you know what that means? Robert shook his head, sweat beading on his forehead. It means triple, I said, speaking for the first time. It means he wants 3 times the transaction value. Correct, Ms. Sterling said. $120,000 times 3. He is demanding $360,000 in restitution. If you pay it, he drops the civil suit and returns the items to the trust to show good faith to the prosecutor. If you do not pay it, he keeps the items, destroys them to hide the evidence, and testifies against you at your criminal trial to cut a deal for himself. The number hung in the air. $360,000. We don't have that kind of money, Leo muttered from inside his hood. Dad spent the cash on the car and the crypto stuff. Robert shot Leo a look of pure venom. But it was too late. The word was out. Crypto stuff? Evelyn asked, her eyebrows rising a fraction of an inch. Robert slumped in his chair, covering his face with his hands. The confession that followed was pathetic. It wasn't the confession of a mastermind. It was the confession of a gambler who had bet the farm on a 3-legged horse. I needed liquidity, Robert whispered into his palms. The firm my partners pushed me out 6 months ago. I didn't tell you. I thought I could make it back. I took out a second mortgage on the house. I put it all into a new coin. It was supposed to go to the moon. And, Evelyn prompted. It went to 0, Robert said, his voice breaking. It was a rug pull. I lost everything. The house is underwater. The bank was going to foreclose next month. That is why I sold the guns. It was the only asset left that wasn't leveraged. I thought with the $120,000, I could pay the arrears, buy the Tesla to keep up appearances, and maybe flip the car later. I looked at my father. He was not a villain. He was something worse. He was a hollow man, filled with nothing but the desperate need to be envied by strangers. So, I said, breaking the silence, you stole my inheritance to pay for a mortgage on a house you had already lost, to buy a car you couldn't afford, to impress people who don't care about you. I did it for the family, Robert shouted, slamming his hand on the table. To keep a roof over your heads. You did it for your ego, Evelyn said. And now you have a choice. She signaled to Ms. Sterling, who slid a document across the table toward Robert. This is a settlement agreement, Evelyn said. I have spoken to the United States Attorney. He is an old friend of mine. He is willing to defer prosecution on the federal charges, provided that the stolen property is returned to the trust immediately and restitution is made to the victim in this case, the dealer, Mr. Sterling. So we just give the money back, Sylvia asked, hopeful. No, Evelyn said. You do not have the money to give back. You spent it. You have to raise $360,000 within 48 hours to pay Arthur Sterling's settlement demand. If you pay him, he returns the guns and the sword. If the items are returned, the trust will withdraw its complaint. The federal case becomes a simple matter of tax penalties, which I will handle. $360,000. Robert looked like he was going to vomit. Mother, I just told you. We are broke. The accounts are frozen. The house is mortgaged to the hilt. Then you sell what is left, Evelyn said coldly. You have assets. You have watches. You have jewelry. Sylvia has a closet full of handbags that cost more than most people's cars. You have furniture. Sell it. But that is humiliation, Sylvia cried. If I sell my Birkins, people will know the pawn shops, the consignment stores they talk. Would you prefer federal prison? Evelyn asked. The jumpsuits there are orange. Sylvia, they will clash terribly with your skin tone. Leo sat up. What about my car if we pay the money? I get the Tesla back, right? Since the case is dropped. I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. The Tesla is gone. Leo, it was seized as proceeds of crime. Even if the criminal charges are dropped, the civil forfeiture remains. The government owns it now. They will auction it off to pay for the investigation costs. But I need a car, Leo whined. I have community service. How am I supposed to get there? The bus, I said. Or walk, though I doubt you will be doing much driving anyway. Ms. Sterling cleared her throat. Regarding Mr. Leo Thorne, as part of his plea deal for the assault on a federal officer and reckless driving, his license has been permanently revoked. He is also ordered to perform 2,000 hours of community service, specifically litter collection on the interstate. Leo's jaw dropped. Picking up trash. Me. Think of it as content for your channel, I suggested. The humble beginnings arc. The room fell silent again. The weight of the ultimatum settled on them. They had to strip themselves of every last vestige of their wealth to save their skins. They had to become exactly what they feared most poor. Sylvia turned to me. Her face was a mask of desperation. She reached across the table, her manicured fingers trembling. Naomi, she pleaded, please, you have money. You have a good job. You are the trustee. You can stop this. Just tell the lawyers that you authorized the sale retroactively. Say it was a misunderstanding. We can pay you back later. Please, don't make us sell our things. Don't make us start over. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had thrown my grandfather's war diary into a recycling bin because it was dirty. I looked at the woman who had told me not to ruin her party while federal agents were surrounding the house. I felt a flicker of pity, but I stomped it out instantly. Pity was a weakness. Pity was what had allowed them to leech off the general for decades. You want me to lie for you? I asked. You want me to commit perjury to save your handbags? I am your mother, she whispered. We are family. Grandfather was family too, I said. And you sold him for cash. I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto hers. You sold the general's honor. Sylvia, you put a price tag on his blood and sacrifice. $120,000. That was the price you set. Well, now the market has corrected itself. You sold his honor. Now you have to buy it back. And the currency is your own vanity. Naomi. $360,000, I repeated. 48 hours, or I testify against you at the grand jury on Monday. Sylvia pulled her hand back as if she had been burned. She looked at Robert, but he was staring at the table, defeated. We will do it, Robert whispered. We will sell it all. Good, Evelyn said. She spun her wheelchair around. Ms. Sterling will provide you with a list of approved liquidators. These are men who pay cash and ask no questions. They will give you pennies on the dollar. But you do not have the luxury of negotiating. You are not sellers today. You are desperate beggars. We are done here, Evelyn announced. Naomi, walk me to the car. I stood up and walked behind my grandmother's chair as she rolled toward the door. I did not look back at my parents. I heard Leo sobbing quietly, a sound of pure, selfish misery. We took the elevator down to the lobby in silence. When the doors opened, Evelyn looked up at me. That was hard, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, I admitted. Whatever is left of them, I just broke it. You didn't break them, Evelyn said, adjusting her shawl. You just forced them to look in the mirror. What they saw broke them. Robert's mortgage, I suspected, but I did not know it was that bad. He has destroyed himself completely. What happens to the house? I asked. The bank takes it, Evelyn said. In 30 days. The foreclosure notice will be posted. They will be on the street. And the items? If they raise the money, and they will. Sylvia has enough jewelry to fund a small revolution. Sterling will return the collection to the firm by Friday. We will have them back. We walked out into the bright sunlight of the D.C. street. Graves was waiting with the car. One more thing, I said, stopping by the car door. The diary. Sterling doesn't have it. Sylvia threw it away. It's gone. Grandmother. Evelyn smiled. It was a small, secretive smile. Is it? She asked. I frowned. Sylvia said she put it in the recycling. The truck came. Sylvia is a liar, Evelyn said, but she is also a hoarder of a different kind. She doesn't throw away things she thinks might have secrets. She throws away things she thinks are ugly. But she is lazy. She likely told the maid to do it. And the maid, Maria, has been with the family for 15 years. She loved the general. My heart skipped a beat. You think Maria kept it? I think, Evelyn said, as Graves helped her into the car, that when you go back to that house to supervise the liquidation, you should check the bottom drawer of the pantry, where Maria keeps her Bible. You might find that loyalty is not entirely dead in that household. She patted my hand. Go back, Naomi. Watch them sell their idols. Ensure every penny goes to the settlement. This is the final turn of the screw. Don't look away. The car door closed, and she drove away. I stood on the sidewalk, watching the traffic. I had to go back to Connecticut. I had to go back to the house that was no longer a home, but a foreclosure waiting to happen. I had to watch my parents sell their lives piece by piece, and for the first time since I saw the Tesla on the roses. I felt a glimmer of hope. The diary might still be there. The soul of the family might still be safe. I hailed a taxi. Union Station, I said. And drive fast. The recovery of the general's collection did not happen with fanfare. There were no flashing lights or SWAT teams for this part. Only the quiet, sterile atmosphere of the United States Marshal's evidence locker in downtown DRC. It was a week after the party, a week that felt like a decade. I stood at the counter, watching the evidence clerk, a young man with tired eyes, bring out the boxes. My lawyer, Ms. Sterling, stood beside me, her posture rigid. She had facilitated the transfer. My parents had done it. They had bled themselves dry. They had sold the jewelry, the watches, the designer furniture, and yes, even Sylvia's beloved collection of handbags. They had raised the $360,000 in a frantic, humiliating fire sale to pay off Arthur Sterling. The civil suit was dropped. The dealer had handed over the items to the authorities to clear his own name. And now, finally, they were being released to the trust. The clerk slid a heavy wooden case across the metal counter. Sign here, ma'am, he said, pushing a clipboard toward me. Acknowledging receipt of property item 4A and 4B, I signed. My hand did not shake. I reached out and undid the brass latches of the display case. They clicked open with a sound that echoed in the quiet room. I lifted the lid. There they were. The Colt 1911 pistols, the steel dark and oiled, the ivory grips yellowed with age and history. Beside them lay the ceremonial sword, its gold wire wrapping catching the fluorescent light. They were safe. They were home. But they were not unscathed. I ran my finger along the edge of the mahogany box. There, deep in the wood, was a long, jagged scratch. It looked like it had been made by a careless handling during the transfer. Perhaps when my father shoved it into the dealer's trunk, or when the dealer tossed it onto a shelf. It was a wound, a scar. It was a permanent reminder of the week my family sold their soul. Is everything there, Ms.? Sterling asked softly. The objects are here, I said, closing the lid gently. The integrity of the box is damaged, but the history is intact. We are done here. I took the box. It was heavy, heavier than I remembered, or perhaps I was just carrying the weight of what it had cost to get it back. The next stop was the house in Connecticut. I did not want to go, but I had to. The bank had moved faster than expected. The foreclosure notice had been posted on the front door 48 hours after the raid. Robert's crypto investment had not just wiped out his savings, it had triggered a default clause in the mortgage. They were being evicted. I drove a rental car, a nondescript sedan. When I pulled into the driveway, the velvet ropes were gone, the spotlights were gone, the white roses were still crushed, a brown, rotting mat of vegetation where the Tesla had sat. The front door was open. Movers were coming in and out, carrying boxes. But these were not professional movers hired for a relocation. They were court-appointed liquidators clearing the premises. I walked inside. The house echoed. The furniture was gone. The art was gone. The future that Robert had tried to build was nothing but bare walls and carpet indentations. I found them in the kitchen. It was the only room that still had chairs. Robert sat at the island, staring into a styrofoam cup of coffee. He looked 20 years older. His hair was unkempt, his face covered in gray stubble. Sylvia was packing the last of the kitchenware into a cardboard box, her movements slow and robotic. She was wearing jeans and a sweatshirt clothes I had never seen her wear in my life, and Leo was sitting on the floor, leaning against the refrigerator. He was scrolling through a phone, an old model with a cracked screen. Likely a burner since his main devices were still in federal custody. "You came to gloat?" Leo asked, without looking up. His voice was raspy. "Come to see the show. The circus is leaving town. Naomi, you should be happy." "I am not happy." "Leo," I said, placing the mahogany case on the counter. "I am just finishing the job." "It is your fault," Leo spat, finally looking at me. His eyes were full of hate. "If you hadn't called the lawyers, if you hadn't freaked out over some old junk, we would still have the money. I would still have my car. Dad would have figured it out. You ruined us." "I didn't buy a car I couldn't afford," I said calmly. "I didn't gamble the mortgage on internet coins, and I didn't sell stolen property. You ruined yourselves. I just turned on the lights." "Stop it," Sylvia screamed. She dropped a stack of plates into the box with a loud clatter. "Just stop it, both of you. We have lost the house. We are moving to a 2-bedroom rental in Bridgeport. Do you hear me? Bridgeport? I don't want to hear about whose fault it is." She turned to Robert. "And you? Sitting there like a statue. Do something. Robert, call someone, fix this." Robert didn't move. "There is no one to call." "Sylvia." They all stopped answering when the news hit. "We are toxic." The unity was gone. The facade of the happy, successful family had crumbled the moment the money ran out. They were tearing each other apart, dogs fighting over scraps in a collapsing building. I looked at them and felt a profound sense of release. I was not part of this. I was not bound to their sinking ship. "I am taking the rest of the personal effects," I said. "Grandfather's things, the books in the attic, the uniform." "Take it," Robert whispered. "Take it all. Just leave us alone." I turned to leave, but before I could, the pantry door opened. Maria, the housekeeper, stepped out. She had her coat on. She had been let go days ago, but she had come back to help them pack, unpaid, because she was a better person than any of them. She walked up to me, her eyes wet. She held something wrapped in a tea towel. "Miss Naomi," she said softly, "your grandmother called me. She told me to look." She handed me the bundle. I unwrapped it. Inside was the leather field diary. It was dusty, and the cover was bent. But it was there. "I found it in the recycling bin that day," Maria whispered, glancing at Sylvia, who was too busy crying over her plates to notice. "I knew the general loved it. I couldn't let it go to the trash. I kept it in my Bible box." I felt a lump form in my throat, hard and painful. I took Maria's hand and squeezed it. "Thank you." "Maria," I said, "you saved the family, not them. You—" I walked out of the house. I walked past the rental truck where my parents were loading the debris of their lives. I walked past Leo, who was still muttering about his unfair destiny. I put the diary and the gun case in my car and drove away. I did not look back in the rearview mirror. There was nothing there worth seeing. I drove straight to my apartment in D.C. It was not a mansion. It was a 4th-floor walk-up with hardwood floors and exposed brick. It was small, quiet, and mine. I paid the mortgage with money I earned. I placed the mahogany case on my coffee table. I placed the diary next to it. The apartment was silent, but it was a peaceful silence, the kind that settles after a storm has passed. I sat down on the floor in front of the coffee table. I needed to inspect them properly, without the eyes of lawyers or clerks on me. I opened the case again. I took out the pistols, checking the actions. They were smooth. I took out the sword, checking the blade. It was unblemished. But something bothered me about the box. The interior velvet was old, a deep crimson. But when I lifted the pistols out, the weight of the box still felt off. It was too heavy for empty wood. I remembered a story the general used to tell me when I was a little girl about how during the war, nothing was what it seemed. Always look for the space between the spaces. Naomi, he would say, that is where the truth hides. I ran my hands along the bottom of the velvet lining. I pressed the corners. Nothing. Then, I noticed a small, almost invisible indentation in the wood molding near the hinge. It wasn't a flaw. It was a trigger. I pressed it hard with my thumb. With a soft click, the bottom panel of the box popped up a fraction of an inch. My heart hammered against my ribs. Arthur Sterling, the dealer, had been a greedy man. He had looked at the guns and seen dollar signs. He had never bothered to look at the box itself. He lacked the patience. I lifted the false bottom. Resting in the shallow compartment underneath were two things. One was a bank book, blue and tattered, from a bank that had changed names 3 times since the 1980s. The other was an envelope, yellowed with age, with a single word written on it in fading fountain pen ink, Naomi. My hands shook as I picked up the envelope. He had written this for me, not for Robert, not for the lawyers, for me. I opened it. The letter was dated 10 years ago, 2 days before he went into the coma from which he never woke. My dearest Naomi, if you are reading this, it means the worst has happened. It means that the wolves have finally come to the door, and that my son, God forgive me for raising him so poorly, has failed his duty. I have always known that Robert sees price tags where he should see values. I hoped I was wrong. I prayed I was wrong. But a general prepares for the enemy he has, not the enemy he wants. You are the only one who listened to my stories. Naomi, you are the only one who understood that these weapons are not for fighting. They are for remembering. I knew that one day you would have to fight to get them back. I knew you would be the one to storm the beach. I have left this savings account for you. It is not part of the official estate. Robert does not know it exists. It is the soldier's pay I saved from the Korean campaign. Compounded over 50 years, it is not a fortune, but it is ammunition. Do not use it for revenge. You have already won that battle by retrieving this box. Use it to build something. Use it to help the men and women who come home with ghosts in their eyes. Just like I did. I am proud of you. Negotiator. You were always the strongest of them all. Love, Grandpa, tears, hot and fast, finally spilled over my cheeks. I hadn't cried during the raid. I hadn't cried at the lawyer's office. I hadn't cried when I saw my parents broken. But I cried now. I opened the bank book. The final balance, updated with interest before he died, was there. $85,000. It was not millions. It was not enough to buy a Tesla Model S Plaid, but it was enough. It was clean money. It was blood money in the most honorable sense, paid for with sweat and service. I wiped my eyes and looked at the pile of treasure on my coffee table. The guns, the sword, the diary, the letter, the money. I had saved it. I had saved him. A knock came at the door. I knew who it was. I composed myself, wiping the tears away, and opened the door. Evelyn Thorne sat there in her wheelchair, looking small but indomitable. Graves stood behind her. "May I come in?" she asked. "Always, Grandmother." Graves wheeled her in and then stepped out into the hall to give us privacy. Evelyn looked around my small apartment. She looked at the simple furniture, the lack of pretension. Then her eyes fell on the coffee table. She saw the open secret compartment. She saw the letter in my hand. She wheeled herself closer. She reached out and touched the letter, her fingers trembling slightly. "He told me he wrote it," she whispered. "He told me he hid it. But he made me promise never to tell you unless you found it yourself. He said, if she is smart enough to get the guns back, she is smart enough to find the letter." "He knew," I said. "He knew they would sell them. He knew people," Evelyn said. "He was a judge of character. Naomi, just like you." She looked at the guns, gleaming under the lamplight. She looked at the scratch on the box. "They are back," she said. They are back, I confirmed. And the money there is $85,000 here. I am going to start the foundation, the Elias Thorne Veteran Support Fund. It starts tomorrow. Evelyn looked at me, and then the mask of the Iron Matriarch cracked. Her face crumpled. The woman who had stared down federal prosecutors and bankrupt sons without blinking began to weep. She reached out her arms. I knelt down beside her wheelchair and hugged her. She felt frail, her bones sharp like a bird's, but her grip was strong. We held each other in the quiet apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the promise of the future. "You did good, Naomi," she sobbed into my shoulder. "You did good. The general is saluting you tonight." "We did it, grandmother," I whispered back. "The winter is over. It is spring now." Outside the window, the sun was setting over Washington, D.C., casting long shadows across the Capitol. But inside the light was warm, the legacy was safe. The war was won. Time is the ultimate forensic accountant. It exposes every bad investment, every emotional debt, and every fraudulent claim until the balance sheet of a life is laid bare. 6 months had passed since the raid, and the reckoning had settled over my family like a fine, suffocating ash. The adrenaline of the conflict was gone, replaced by the dull, grinding reality of consequence. My father, Robert, was the first to crumble under the weight of his own emptiness. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago. It was not a battle of titans. It was a scurrying of rats, fleeing a sinking ship. Since there were no assets left to divide, only debts, the proceedings were quick and brutal. Robert now lived in a basement apartment in a complex near the highway in Stamford. I had driven past it once, just to verify the address for the legal files. It was a place of peeling beige paint and dumpsters that were always overflowing. He had lost his job at the firm permanently, the bribery charge, though pleaded down to a misdemeanor thanks to Evelyn's expensive lawyers, was a stain that no amount of white-collar whitewashing could remove. He was now selling insurance over the phone for a predatory company that preyed on the elderly. The man who had once lectured me on the importance of leveraging assets was now reading scripts to pensioners, trying to upsell them on policies they did not need, earning a commission that barely covered his rent. He was 60 years old, alone, and stripped of the only thing he ever truly loved, his reflection in the eyes of others. Leo fared no better. The Red Baron was grounded. My brother, the boy who had dreamed of being a digital mogul, had learned the hard way that the internet has no loyalty. When the news of the raid broke, his followers did not rally behind him. They mocked him. The video of him being face-planted into the gravel became a meme, circulated on the very platforms he had tried to conquer. He was no longer an influencer. He was a punchline, with his license revoked and a hefty fine to pay for the court costs. Leo had been forced to take a job that required no driving and no degree. He was working as a server at a chain restaurant near the mall. Vance, the investigator, had sent me a photo taken by a surveillance operative. It showed Leo in a polyester uniform that was a size too big, wiping down a sticky table while a group of teenagers boys who used to like his car videos laughed at him from a nearby booth. He looked defeated. His posture was slumped, his eyes dead. The arrogance that had fueled him for 22 years had been starved out of him. The ultimate irony, however, was the fate of the Tesla. The government had auctioned it off to recoup the costs of the investigation and the storage fees. It did not sell for the $130,000 my father had paid. It did not sell for even half that, because it had been seized in a high-profile fraud case and had a clouded title history. It was considered a distressed asset. It sold for $45,000. A used car dealership in New Jersey bought it. I heard they peeled off the ceramic coating and used it as a loaner vehicle for customers getting their oil changed. The machine that had cost my family their soul was now being driven by soccer moms while their minivans were in the shop. It was a fitting end for a false idol. But the moment that truly severed the final tendon of my attachment to them happened on a Tuesday afternoon in November. I was in a shopping center in Norwalk. picking up a prescription. As I walked past a beauty supply store, one of those places that sells discount shampoo and knockoff fragrances, I saw her. Sylvia. My mother was standing behind the counter, wearing a smock with a name tag that read, Manager. She was arranging a display of lipsticks, her movements sharp and angry. She looked different. The Botox had worn off, revealing the lines of bitterness around her mouth. Her hair, usually dyed a perfect, expensive blonde, was showing roots of gray. I stopped. I watched her for a moment through the glass. She was berating a teenage employee, pointing a manicured finger at a shelf that was apparently not organized to her standards. Even here, amidst the smell of acetone and cheap soap, she was trying to be the queen. I pushed open the door. A bell chimed. Sylvia looked up, her face arranging itself into a customer service smile, which instantly crumbled when she saw it was me. Naomi, she breathed. Her hand went to her throat, a gesture of theatrical shock. Hello, Mother? I said. She hurried around the counter, her eyes darting to the other customers to see if anyone was watching. She grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the back of the store, near the clearance bins. What are you doing here? She hissed, though her voice wavered. Have you come to see how far I have fallen? Is that it? You and your grandmother must be having a wonderful time laughing at me. I am not laughing, I said. I was just passing by. Look at this, she said, gesturing wildly at the shelves of discount conditioner. I am managing a shop. Naomi, me, I have to deal with common people all day. I have to count the till. It is exhausting. I am on my feet for 8 hours. My ankles are swollen. It is called work, Mother, I said. Most people do it. But I am not most people, she snapped, her old entitlement flaring up like a dying ember. I am a thorn, or I was. Your father. That idiot, he ruined everything. If he hadn't bought that stupid coin, if he hadn't listened to Leo, we would be in Italy right now. She looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. But they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of self-pity. Naomi, she said, her voice softening into a wheedle. It is so hard. The apartment in Bridgeport, the walls are thin. The neighbors cook curry all night. I can't sleep. You have the trust money now. Evelyn told me. You have the general's money. Couldn't you just help me with a deposit on a better place? Just a condo. I am your mother. I gave you life. I looked at her. I looked for a trace of the woman who should have protected me, who should have taught me values. I saw only a stranger who had pawned my history for a vacation. I have a question for you, I said quietly. A question. She blinked, confused. About the money. No, I said. About the general, your father-in-law, the man whose house you lived in for 20 years, the man whose money bought your clothes and your cars. What about him? She asked, impatient. Do you remember the color of his eyes? Sylvia froze. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it. Her brow furrowed. She looked to the left, then to the right, searching her memory. Well, she stammered. They were dark brown, no. Maybe hazel? He wore those glasses a lot, and he was old. Naomi, what does this matter? He is dead. They were blue, I said. Ice blue, like mine. She stared at me, her face blank. You lived with him for 2 decades, I continued, my voice devoid of anger, just cold fact. You ate at his table, you spent his fortune, and you never once looked him in the eye long enough to know the color. You didn't see him, you just saw the checkbook. That is not fair, she whispered. I took care of him. No, I said. Maria took care of him. You tolerated him. I stepped back. The air in the store felt heavy with the scent of synthetic flowers, the same smell that had choked the house when I first arrived. I am not giving you money, Mother, I said. Not now. Not ever. The general's money is for people who served. You only served yourself. Naomi, she cried out as I turned away. You can't leave me here. I am family. I know, I said, pausing at the door. That is the tragedy of it. I walked out. I got into my car and blocked her number. Then I called my service provider and changed my own number. I called the bank and put a final lock on every account, ensuring that even if they found a way to forge a signature, the system would reject it. I cut the cord. It was a clean amputation. The final legal maneuver came from Evelyn. 2 weeks after my encounter with Sylvia, my grandmother summoned her lawyers to the estate. I was there as a witness. She rewrote her last will and testament. It was a short document. It revoked all previous wills. It explicitly disinherited Robert Thorne and Leo Thorne, citing gross moral turpitude and the squandering of family assets. It left a small pension to Maria, the housekeeper who had saved the diary. It left the bulk of the estate to the Elias Thorne Veteran Support Fund, and the remainder the house in DRC, the investments, and the control of the trust she left to me. "They will contest it when I die," Evelyn said, signing the document with a steady hand. "They will scream and sue." "Let them," Ms. Sterling said, stamping the wax seal. "This will is ironclad. We have included a no-contest clause. If they challenge it, they lose even the small personal items you left them." "Good," Evelyn said. She looked at me. "The timeline is complete, Naomi, except for one loose end." "The house?" I said. "The bank foreclosure auction was yesterday," Evelyn said. "Did you attend?" "I did," I replied, and I reached into my bag and pulled out a set of keys. They were not new keys. They were the old brass keys to the front door of the Greenwich house, which I had requested be returned to me by the bank officer after the sale. "I bought it," I said. Evelyn smiled. "How much?" $700,000, I said. "The market is down, and nobody wanted a house that had been stripped of its fixtures and involved in a federal raid. It was a bargain. And you used the general's money." "I used the $85,000 as the down payment," I said. "And I took a mortgage for the rest. I can afford it." "My job pays well." "And what will you do with it?" Evelyn asked, though she already knew the answer. "It is too big for one person, and the memories are not all good." "I am not going to live there," I said. "I am going to curate it." The following Saturday, I drove back to Greenwich. The for sale sign was gone. The driveway was empty. The crushed roses had been dug up and the soil turned over, ready for new planting. I walked through the front door. The house was cold and empty, but the smell of Sylvia's perfume was finally gone, replaced by the clean scent of fresh paint. I had hired a crew to repaint the walls, covering the grage panels with a warm, deep navy blue, the general's favorite color. I walked into the study. The mahogany display case was back on the wall. I had mounted it myself. Inside, the Colt pistols and the sword rested on fresh velvet. The diary sat on the desk, protected by a glass cover. But I was not stopping there. I had spent the last week contacting the general's old regiment. I had reached out to museums and collectors. I was turning the ground floor of the house into the General Elias Thorne Center for Military History. It would be a private museum, open by appointment to veterans, historians, and schools. The living room, where my parents had sipped wine and plotted their European vacation, was now filled with display cases holding uniforms, maps from the Battle of the Bulge, and medals. The dining room, where Leo had whined about his inheritance, was now a library of military strategy books. I walked to the window and looked out at the driveway. I imagined the Tesla sitting there, red and arrogant. The ghost of that car was gone. In its place, I planned to put a vintage Willys Jeep, the kind my grandfather had driven in 1945. I heard a car pull up. It was not a luxury sedan. It was a simple van from a local nursery. 2 men got out and began unloading bushes. White roses. I had ordered 50 of them. I walked out to meet them. The air was crisp and cold, signaling the coming winter, but the sun was bright. "Where do you want these, ma'am?" the gardener asked. "Right here," I said, pointing to the spot where the Tesla had crushed the old garden. "Plant them deep. Make sure the roots take hold. I want them to last for 100 years. "You got it," the man said. I stood there for a long time, watching them dig. The earth was dark and rich. It was ready to receive something real again. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. It was probably a work email, or perhaps a notification from the security system at the DC apartment. It didn't matter. My parents were gone. My brother was gone. They were living the small, petty lives they had carved out for themselves. They were no longer the protagonists of this story. They were footnotes. I looked at the house. It stood tall and dignified, stripped of the false modern facade. Returning to its roots, it was no longer a monument to greed. It was a fortress of memory. I touched the keys in my pocket. "Welcome home, General," I whispered. The wind blew through the trees, and for a moment, I could have sworn I smelled the faint, comforting scent of pipe tobacco. The ruin was complete, but from the rubble, the foundation had held, and that was all that mattered. The morning of the dedication ceremony was crisp, the kind of clear, biting autumn day that General Elias Thorne used to say was perfect for marching. The air smelled of fallen leaves and wood smoke, a sharp departure from the cloying, synthetic perfume that had choked this house only 7 months ago. The restoration of the estate was complete. The white roses in the front garden, replanted where the red tires of the Tesla had once ground the earth into mud, were blooming late in the season, resilient and stubborn, just like the man who had first planted them. I stood in the center of what used to be the study. It was no longer a place of shadows and dust. The walls had been stripped of the gray paneling my parents had installed and returned to a deep, rich navy blue. The floor-to-ceiling bookshelves were filled again, not with decorative fillers bought by the yard, but with the General's actual library books on strategy, history, and philosophy that I had spent months tracking down and repurchasing from the used bookstores where my mother had dumped them. But the heart of the room was the display case. It was mounted securely on the north wall, protected by museum-grade glass and a humidity control system. I had hired a master woodworker to repair the mahogany box. He had offered to sand out the deep scratch left by Arthur Sterling's careless handling, but I had stopped him. "Leave it," I had told him. "It is part of the story now." Inside the case, the twin Colt 1911 pistols gleamed with a dark, oily sheen. The ivory handles, yellowed by time and history, seemed to glow under the track lighting. Below them, the ceremonial sword rested on new velvet. To the right, pinned against a backing of black silk, were his medals, the Silver Star, the Purple Heart, and the ribbons of his campaigns. And in the center, open to the page dated December 25th, 1944, was the leather diary. I placed my hand on the glass. The vibration of the house felt different now. It was no longer a hollow shell echoing with the petty arguments of greedy people. It felt solid. It felt occupied, not by ghosts, but by memory. "It looks better than it did when he was alive," a voice said behind me. I turned to see my grandmother, Evelyn Thorne. She was sitting in her wheelchair, dressed in a suit of cream wool that made her look like royalty. She had aged in the last half year. The fight to evict my parents, the legal battles, and the emotional toll of disinheriting her own son had carved new lines into her face, but her eyes were bright. For the first time in years, she did not look like she was preparing for a funeral. She looked like she was celebrating a birth. "We did it, Grandmother," I said. "You did it, Naomi," she corrected, rolling forward to inspect the case. "I just provided the legal ammunition. You provided the will." She reached out and touched the brass plaque I had installed beneath the case. It read, "The General Elias Thorne Collection, restored by the Thorne Family Trust, 2026. "Are you ready for the guests?" she asked. "I am," I said. We moved to the front entrance. The heavy oak doors were thrown open. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. This was not the crowd of social climbers and sycophants who had attended my parents' Future is Here party. There were no influencers. There were no real estate developers looking for leverage. Instead, there were men and women in uniform. There were historians from the local university, There were neighbors who had known the general and had stayed away during my parents' reign of tackiness. And there were the veterans. 6 of them had come. They were old men now, their backs bent, walking with canes or walkers, but wearing their VFW caps with a dignity that no designer clothing could ever match. They were the men my grandfather had commanded, or the men who had served in the units he led. They had traveled from as far as Ohio and Virginia when they heard that the Thorn House was being returned to its purpose. Evelyn was wheeled out to the top of the stairs. I stood beside her, holding a pair of ceremonial scissors. We had stretched a simple red ribbon across the doorway. "Friends," Evelyn said, her voice surprisingly strong in the morning air. "My husband, General Thorn, believed that history does not belong to the past. He believed it belongs to those who have the courage to remember it. For a time, this house lost its memory. It lost its way. But today, thanks to his granddaughter, Naomi, the compass has been reset. We are not just opening a museum today, we are keeping a promise." She nodded to me. I cut the ribbon. The silk parted with a soft snip. The applause was polite and respectful, a stark contrast to the bass-heavy music that had thumped here months ago. It was the sound of genuine appreciation. As the guests began to file inside, guided by the docents I had hired students from the history department, I stayed on the porch for a moment. Letting the cool wind hit my face, I looked out over the driveway. The gravel was neatly raked. The ghost of the red Tesla was gone, exorcised by the presence of a vintage Willys Jeep I had parked near the garage, a physical anchor to the era we were honoring. And then, I saw him. He was standing on the other side of the wrought iron gates, across the street, half hidden behind the trunk of a large maple tree. He was not wearing designer streetwear. He was wearing a faded denim jacket and black pants that looked like part of a service industry uniform. His hair, once styled and gelled for the camera, was grown out and messy. It was Leo. He was watching the ceremony. He was watching the uniformed officers shake my hand. He was watching the house he had once claimed was his birthright. Our eyes met across the distance of 50 yards and a million bad decisions. I waited for the anger to rise. I waited for the urge to shout at him, to tell him to leave, to mock him for his fall. But nothing came. There was no heat in my chest. There was only a quiet, distant pity. He looked hungry, not necessarily for food, though he looked thinner, but hungry for the relevance he had lost. He looked at the house with a mixture of longing and fear. He saw the gathered crowd, the respect being paid, and he realized that this was a world he could not enter. He had traded his ticket to this legacy for a few months of internet fame and a car that was now a loaner in New Jersey. He took a step forward, his hand raising slightly as if to wave or call out. I did not move. I did not smile. I simply stood there, flanked by the pillars of my grandfather's house, wearing the black suit that was my armor. Leo froze. He saw the line I had drawn. It was not a velvet rope. It was a wall of absolute moral separation. He lowered his hand. He looked down at his cheap shoes, kicked a pile of leaves, and turned away. He walked down the street, his shoulders hunched, disappearing into the suburban landscape that had swallowed him whole. Naomi. I turned. One of the veterans, a man named Colonel Miller, was standing in the doorway. He was leaning heavily on a cane, his chest heavy with medals. "Sir," I said, straightening up. "I served with Elias in the Ardennes," Miller said, his voice gravelly. "He spoke of you often. He said you had the negotiator's mind but the soldier's heart. I didn't know what he meant back then. I do now." He looked at the open door, then back at me. He shifted his weight, released his cane to lean against the doorframe, and slowly, stiffly, raised his hand in a salute. It was not a casual gesture. It was the sharp, precise salute of a man who knew exactly what respect cost. I felt a tightness in my throat that made it hard to breathe. I stood at attention and returned the salute. "Welcome home, Colonel," I said. "Please, go inside. The brandy in the library is the General's private reserve." "Thank you, ma'am," he said, and hobbled inside. I walked back into the house, The reception was in full swing. People were moving through the rooms, speaking in hushed, reverent tones. They were reading the diary entries. They were looking at the maps. They were asking questions about the battles. This was the revenge, I realized then. Standing in the living room where my mother had once screamed about feng shui. That the greatest revenge wasn't the bankruptcy or the humiliation of my parents. It wasn't the foreclosure or the auction. The greatest revenge was building something so meaningful, so full of substance and honor, that their shallow, selfish minds could never comprehend it. They hadn't just lost the house. They had lost the ability to be part of something that mattered. I was living a life of purpose, and they were doomed to live a life of transactions. The afternoon wore on. The sun began to dip below the tree line, casting long, golden shadows across the lawn. The guests began to leave, shaking my hand, offering their thanks. Evelyn had retired to the guest suite I had prepared for her, exhausted but content. By 6 in the evening, the house was quiet again. I walked to the front door to lock up. The sunset was hitting the brass plaque on the front of the house, making the name General Elias Thorne burn like fire. I stepped out onto the porch to close the shutters. As I reached for the latch, a sound caught my attention. It was the heavy grinding roar of a diesel engine. A city bus was making its way up the hill. It was the number 42 connector, the bus that ran from the low-income rental districts of Bridgeport to the service entrances of the wealthy estates in Greenwich. It was the bus that carried the maids, the gardeners, and the retail workers who kept this town running. The bus stopped at the red light at the bottom of the driveway. I looked at the windows. They were dirty, streaked with road grime. Inside, the passengers sat with their heads down, tired after a long shift, rocking with the vibration of the idling engine, and there, in the third window from the back, I saw them, Robert and Sylvia. They were sitting side by side, but they were not talking. Robert was staring at the floor, holding a plastic grocery bag between his knees. He looked gray and small. Sylvia was leaning her head against the glass, her eyes closed, her mouth open slightly in exhaustion. She was wearing her manager's smock under a cheap coat. They were less than 50 feet from the house they had owned for 20 years. They were passing the very driveway where they had parked the Tesla. They were passing the white roses, but they didn't look up. They were too tired, too broken, and too consumed by their own misery to even notice where they were. They passed the museum dedicated to the man they had betrayed, and they didn't even turn their heads. The light turned green. The bus groaned, spewed a cloud of black exhaust, and lurched forward, carrying my parents away into the twilight. I watched them go until the taillights disappeared around the curve. I felt a profound sense of finality. The cord was not just cut, it had dissolved. They were strangers on a bus, passing through a world they no longer inhabited. I turned back to the plaque. I ran my thumb over the letters of my grandfather's name. Legacy is not something you sell to buy a future. Legacy is the foundation you stand on to weather the storm, and today, the storm has passed. I whispered to the empty porch, the words forming in my mind with crystal clarity. I stepped inside. I closed the heavy oak door. I turned the deadbolt with a solid, satisfying thud. The house was safe. The history was safe, and for the first time in a long time, so was I. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey of justice, heritage, and the high price of greed. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Please leave a comment below telling us which country or city you are listening in, and share your thoughts on Naomi's decision. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Blue Payback channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so we can share these stories with even more people around the world. Your support keeps the legacy alive.